Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Remade the World with His Dirty Hands? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. I want to believe that there's more. That we could be more. Hell, we could be heroes. Midoriya Izuku wants to be a hero. Anyone can tell you that. It's all he ever talks about. You're quirkless. Midoriya Izuku wants to be a hero. He keeps countless journals on heroes, writing down their quirks and the specifics of it. It has always been a belief of Kaken's that heroes with more powerful quirks are more likely to be successful. Which is, Izuku has to admit, true. But he knows a lot of heroes who has saved countless people with a quirk that isn't quite flashy nor suited for hero work. He has seen lesser-known heroes, has even searched up on the dark web info on underground heroes whose quirk makes them practically quirkless in combat. I'm so sorry, Izuku. But why are you sorry? You didn't do anything wrong. It's not your fault. Why are you crying? Stuff. I'm so sorry. Midoriya Izuku wants to be a hero. Even when his doctor looks at him with pity. Even when his mom cries, blaming herself. Even when she doesn't think to encourage, doesn't tell him he can become a hero. Even when Kaken knocks his hand away and screams at him, even when the ridicules and insults bury themselves deep under his skin and make a home for themselves. Even when his very own father turned his back on him and left them all alone. Even when the whole FING world has given up on him. Midoriya Izuku wants to be a hero. Izuku's short legs don't carry him fast enough as he dashes down the streets, on the verge of being late for school. It's not that he had woken up late. No, he got up at the exact same time he always did, got dressed in record time, ate breakfast leisurely with his mom, and left home on time sharp. Earlier, he had passed a kid who dropped her pocket money she was going to save up down the drains on the streets. So Izuku manages to pull the gratings out and climbed in to grab the soaked piece of paper for her. So now he's running to school late with his shoes soaked in dirty water. He slows down at the crossing, a junction with 3 roads that usually is more crowded later on in the evening when everyone is going out for the Friday night. An old lady pushes her cart of takoyaki, though it seems to be stuck, unable to get out of the crossing and up onto the pavement. Without any hesitation, Izuku throws all thoughts of going to school on time out of his head and head over to her. "Good morning, Auntie." He calls out to her, already yanking the front of her cart onto the pavement. He adds, to be polite, "Can I help?" Without waiting for an answer, he moves around to the other side, pushing the cart and lifting it with all his 5-year-old strength onto the pavement when the wheels hit the elevated path. He bows to the old lady and runs off in the direction of preschool. "Have a good day, Auntie." Izuku calls back. As Izuku dashes around the corner, the woman sighs, shaking her head fondly. Hard to find kids like him these days. Izuku ignores the squish, squash, squish of his shoes. His breathing comes hard and uneven as he forgets to fit his small, weak body with oxygen. When he finally reaches the nursery, he puffs up his chest and walks inside. He sneaks over to a corner, unnoticed by the other children playing in their small classroom. His hero analysis journal is taken out and placed onto his lap, scribbling away on theories and such. He doesn't know how long has passed when he hears the pitter-patter of rain on the glass doors. "Hey, Deku." Izuku doesn't flinch. He doesn't react negatively. He looks up and smiles. He isn't going to give that bully the satisfaction. "Hi, Kaken." "Wipe that shitty grin off your face," Kaken snarls. It seems he's updated his vocabulary a little bit more in the past week, taking it from Auntie Mitsuki. "Ah, Kaken." Izuku perks up, beaming so bright Kaken blinks in his bright expression. "Did you catch the hero fight with Ingenium?" Kaken looks at Izuku for a moment before huffing and turning away. Izuku guesses it's his lack of reaction to Kaken's very obviously hostile tone, as the boy is used to getting all the weaker kids to cower before him without even lifting a finger. It's a classic case of a child's quirk being so much better than the people around them that they grow an overinflated ego, so much so that when they're convinced they can be a hero, they fail with no understanding as to why. Usually, the shock of not always being the best sends them into a NET mode, and if not handled correctly, will hurt their future as it would be too late to change the beliefs they grew up with. But Demon, if Izuku isn't going to save his best friend from the fate that lies in wake for the boy dreaming to get into UA. Oh, did you not? Izuku questions, to which Kaken snaps back bitingly. Of course I did. Who did you think I am, shitty Deku? Ah. Izuku smiles serenely, as expected of Kaken. I think keeping up with all the latest news on villains and heroes is what would make a top hero later on. Demonstrate. But Ingenium was so cool, right? Apprehending the villain all alone. Kaken turns and stalks away, leaving Izuku hanging. He looks down at the page he was writing on, tapping his pencil to the dirty paper covered in smudges of graphite that stuck to the side of his hands. He had left off on an extensive analysis of Ingenium's abilities and what the limits of it were. By now, after almost 3 years since the hero's debut, he managed to find a list of limits to the hero's engines, how long he can use them for on an extended PRD of time, and how fast the engine can take before overheating per second. Though he's also got a good grip on Ingenium's moral compass, how far his justice goes whilst observing how he deals with hostage situations. The villain was weak. That's all. Kaken's voice snaps him out of his trance of mumbling, causing him to look back up sheepishly. The boy plops down in front of Izuku and throws some sheets of paper on the ground. But if he used his head, his quirk could be extremely useful. Izuku reasons. Yeah, well, it's not like he can teleport that far. Kaken's voice doesn't lose its intensity even when he looks down at his hands and starts balling the paper up. True. Izuku taps his pencil on his chin, looking up as he leans back on the wall. I estimate he can teleport about 12 meters or more at a time. Kaken snorts, resisting the urge to raise a brow, impressed by Izuku's thorough, almost obsessive observations. Yeah, like I said, I bet I could beat him up right now. He covers the ball with another sheet of paper, twisting it around at the end. No, but what's impressive is that, if you look closely, Ingenium is moving before he even teleports. He gets to where the villain teleported the moment he appears, almost like he knew where the villain will teleport every time. So cool. No way. Kaken shouts, looking up for a brief moment as he starts to draw All Might's face on the paper with a black marker. I bet it's just his quirk. Izuku laughs, rubbing the back of his neck. Well, I notice that kind of stuff, 'cause without a quirk, when I become a hero I would have to rely on my... In a split second, Kaken's demeanor changes. He drops the paper and pen he was holding and lurches forward. Izuku winces, a gentle cry leaving his lips as smoking palms burn a brand into bare skin. You still haven't given up yet, useless FNG Deku? Katsuki screams into face something not befitting for a 6-year-old. Izuku feels a tightness in his throat, feels the uncontrollable trembling threatening to tear open his skin and show the world just how terrified he is right now. I can still be a hero, Kaken. Speak up, shitty Deku. His smile comes out crooked and more of a grimace if anything. I think that it would be symbolic to have for the number 1 hero. To have the first quirkless hero as his sidekick. You know. T-sich, Kaken drops Izuku from the tight position he was being held in, falling into a slouch that seems even more intimidating than him standing at his full height of 3 feet and 9 inches. He turns and walks away, but not before grabbing his Teru Terabozu. Izuku looks down and sees the extra paper Kaken brought for him scattered on the floor. Izuku pauses before the messy, handwritten poster on the telephone pole. On it is a crayon drawing of what looks to be a brown-spotted drawing of a dinosaur, coupled with what seems to be a red collar with the kanji for dog on it. Below are more letters, saying, last seen near Dagoba Beach, if found please return to Hana, though he just barely makes it out. In the corner of the paper, in much neater handwriting, is a number and name. Izuku jots down in the back of his hero notebook, which is filled with similar information. After peering into a ramen place for a quick look at the clock at its back wall, Izuku decides he doesn't need to be home till late and his mom will probably assume that he's at the playground with the other kids. He runs as fast as his tiny waddling legs can carry him, off in the direction of Dagoba Beach. He knows he should probably tell someone, but he has to finish this before dark. The sun is still high in the sky when he reaches the waterside. It's a mess, the trash-filled beach. But Izuku's mind focuses on his thought that a dog could only have so many places to hide. Inu! Izuku shouts as he pads down to the first pile of rubbish. He climbs onto a broken washing machine, grabbing onto a ledge of metal when his foot slips on the creaking door of it. He assumes the dog is literally called Dog as the caller stated. Inu! He jumps onto the roof of a half-buried car, stumbling forward but catching himself before he falls into a faceful of broken clothes hangers. He kneels down on the rusted roof, wrapping his fingers over the window frame without the actual window of the car in it. Holding tight, he lowers his head so that he's peering into the car upside down. Inu! Nope! Izuku yelps and loses balance, falling forward face-first into the sand. He manages to not break a neck doing that and groans. He pulls himself up, dusting the sand from his clothes and pulling his backpack onto his back again. Luckily nothing's fallen out when he flipped on his back. Izuku walks forward and crouches before the rusty car, studying its inside. A boy is lying in the back seat, his legs crossed and his eyes staring at Izuku amusedly. He doesn't seem to need a cushion to rest his head on the metal door on the other side of the car, instead propping himself up with a pair of huge, deep red wings. "Hi," Izuku says, unafraid of the stranger who only looks to be about 6, maybe 7 years older than him. "What are you doing in there, Oniai-sen?" The boy hums. "I could say the same for you, Squirt." "I'm doing hero work," Izuku replies, unhesitant as he pokes a thumb into his chest. The boy relaxes back into his wings. Izuku can't help but feel this spot is a bit dangerous, considering he could get stuck in the windows as the door is trapped by the huge mass of sand half burying it, even spilling some into the interior of the car itself. Ah! Izuku remembers why he's here. "Have you seen a dog with brown spots around here? Red collar with the word dog on it?" Responds to Inu, "Probably." Oniai-sen seems to contemplate something for a moment before he kicks his foot out, causing the passenger seat to bounce. There is a high-pitched noise and a blur of white and brown darts out from the front of the car onto Oniai-sen's lap. A dog with a red collar bounds around, seemingly excited for no reason. "Inu!" The dog responds and tackles Izuku, pushing him onto his back as it licks his face furiously. Izuku looks at the collar and below the kanji inscribed on it is a number, the very same one on the poster. He smiles, but it falls in a moment. "Why didn't you return him to the owner?" Izuku asks the Oniai-san. He frowns at the older boy's nonchalant expression. "Well, it's too much hassle," he says, shrugging and not meeting Izuku's eyes. "A hero would help anyone no matter the hassle." Izuku shouts. Whatever." Oniai-san's face contorts into an irritated one, as if someone woke him from a nap. "I don't want to be a hero either way. Too much work." Izuku crosses his arm and huffs, letting go of Inu, the small dog yapping rapidly as it runs around in circles. "You say that." Izuku pulls up his best impression of Auntie Mitsuki giving a lecture to a misbehaving kaken. "But if people like you actually help instead of lazing around, then there wouldn't be that much work for heroes to do." Oniai-sen puffs out a breath of laughter, bemused by where Izuku's train of thought arrives at. He replies, "Well, Squirt, just one person isn't going to make a difference." "Of course not." Izuku deflates. "If someone like All Might can't even make a difference alone, then what use would a useless, quirkless kid be to the world? All he's doing is existing, and occasionally helping people under the pretense of actually achieving his goal of becoming a hero, impossible as it may be. He's just a waste of space, really. One day when he faces his maker, he will have to dig up the little acts of everyday heroism that will undoubtedly not count for much when he has to justify if the maker made the right choice in allowing Izuku to exist at all." "Okay, all right." Oniai-sen tries to wave away the heavy pressure on his chest, a guilt with no source nor reason. "I'll help." Immediately the atmosphere around them brightens up and Oniai-sen blinks away the spots in his eyes from the sudden ray of light that originated from Izuku's brilliant smile. "Great!" Izuku beams. Will return the dog. Oni-san sighs, exasperated. He fishes a phone, Endeavor-themed, out of his hoodie, also Endeavor-themed, and beckons for the dog to come over. He types in the number on the collar and presses to call out. Izuku crouches before the dog, his hand hovering, dipping close enough for the dog to yap at him before he pulls his hand up higher. It teases Inu, the tiny dog going on its hind legs and nipping at his hand. Izuku keeps an ear on the voices next to him, one belonging to Oni-san and one a muffled voice distorted by the speaker, just as he scratches Inu's belly and the dog rolls over. Once the receiver clicks, Izuku turns to look at the Oni-san. Ah, he beckons the younger boy over. I'll write you the address, I've already got it memorized. I'll write you the address and… Izuku pps his head to the side, studying the Oni-san. No. Oni-san pauses, his face frozen. What? You're taking me to their house. Izuku smiles a sickeningly sweet smile. No, Oni-san retorts, I don't have to. But you will, Izuku ends it, picking up the dog. Despite its small stature, its weight almost crushes Izuku as he tries to balance it on his hip before he lets go, the dog slipping on the sand and getting right back up into the giddy bouncing. He looks over to where Oni-san stands. Up, taking note of the uncontrollable bounding of his leg, the same way he was doing when he was in the car. Izuku plants his tiny fists on his hips and demands, lead the way, Oni-san. Oni-san makes a pained face, his grimace lasting a second before he exhales softly. A smile is pulled up onto his lips and he picks the dog up, carrying it under his arms. Then, without warning, he grabs Izuku around the waist and hoists him up. Izuku cries out in surprise, feeling something soft supporting his arms and balancing him as Oni-san slung him over his shoulders. Please keep your arms and legs inside the ride. Squealing, Izuku covers his mouth as Oni-san's wings lift and flap once, immediately pushing them into the sky. The ground pulls away from where Izuku stares at it over Oni-san's shoulders. When Izuku twists on the shoulder, he sees small pointy objects, feathers, he realizes, pushing and holding him in the air, shifting to accommodate his new position. Wind whisks past his face, stinging his cheeks in an exhilarating way. Izuku lets out a breathless laugh, eyes wide as he feels the ecstatic beating of his heart, the rapid thump 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 thump, never-ending and pulsing with the blood in his ears. Like the steady rhythm of music, blood is pumped through his body, faster than fast. A feeling of euphoria grips his heart. His fingers bunch into Oni-san's school uniform for a moment, as he's scared of falling off. Though his mind is sharp and knows that no matter what, the feathers will catch him, his body knows different and will always fear the tiny slip, the quick passing of buildings below them, close, yet too far. But the fear is welcome. It's what pumps blood through his veins, what carries the chemical through his body, something Izuku would later come to know as C9H13NO3, and later, adrenaline. Both Oni-san and Izuku let out a soft sound as they touched down on a lawn. Izuku shivers, not realizing that his hands were not holding on to anything for a minute or two already in the 5-minute flight. The feathers compromise around him and let him slide down onto the grass with a quiet oomph. His legs wobble, weaker than he expected, and the pair gives out from underneath him. Unbeknownst to Izuku, the Oni-san watches him uneasily as the dog slips from his hold and ran up to the house, ducking into the pet door. The younger boy laughs breathlessly as he walks to ring the doorbell, and Oni-san wavers in his decision to join Izuku. When Izuku looked at him so readily and spoke to him with such conviction, chills ran down his spine at the absolute intensity of his stare, whether Izuku knew or not. This isn't the first heart he's moved. Nor will this be the last. After all, this is a story of a boy with a fire in his gaze that could warm the coldest of hearts, and sometimes even burn them. This is the story of a boy who could be an angel, yet could readily be the very devil himself. This is the story of a fall from grace, and the battle to rise again. The Oni-san sighs. Have you ever stopped to think about how their families feel? I thought so hard about it. I went crazy. The music of summer drones on around him. Izuku balances precariously between the two thin branches. When he tested it earlier, he was sure he would fall through if he ever placed his full weight on the frail stick. So when he climbed the tree, he was careful to never shift his whole weight into one spot as he positioned himself on the complicated network of branches reaching out of the tree. Now, he is leaned forward with his forearms pressed neatly against the prickly bark of the trunk, his foot perched as far away from each other and his hands as possible. This way, Izuku guesses through pure logic, it should spread his mass out a bit more, though he can never be sure since he never learned it in school, since he's 6, and merely speculated through observation. And it seems that he guessed correctly. "Here, kitty," Izuku speaks quietly to the two felines nestled comfortably in the little alcove in the tree, as if the mere vibrations of his voice can cause the branches to collapse. He can feel them beneath his shoes now, the springy quality of the sticks he felt would be wise to use as footholds. His left arm unfolds from where it leant against the trunk and his hand reaches out as he shifts his weight carefully as he can, away from the cat so he wouldn't fall forward into the tree and lose the delicate balance he has on the branches. The bigger one stretches forward, eyes narrowing softly as its nose grazes Izuku's fingers. A second passes and Izuku takes a slow breath as steady as he can, holding it trapped in his lungs so nothing can shake him from the precarious position he holds. Finally, after a suspended moment, the cat starts to climb into Izuku's small hands and he shifts against the trunk to accommodate for the extra weight. He finally lets loose the breath he was holding, relief flooding him as the cat finds a balanced stance on his shoulders. Right now he just has to get it to safety below and come back. The cat pushes off his shoulder in a leap and lands gracefully on the grass below. There is a small second where time seems to slow to a stop as Izuku looks down to see the long drop below him. The height might have been exaggerated from this perspective, since Izuku made sure beforehand that he wouldn't have such a hard fall if he slipped. In that moment, Izuku does nothing as he stares at the grass that seems to be further than the bottom of a cliff. He teeters, gravity tugging him backwards, and when his weight lifts off the forearm he had folded against the trunk and was using to lean on, he snaps back into real time and scrambles to regain balance. His arm pulls away to wrap around the trunk as fast as he can. A sharp instance of pain barely registers from the friction of gnarled bark against skin. He presses up against the tree just as the branches give way beneath him and he pushes off it, shoes desperately trying to grab onto the trunk. Izuku may or may not be bleeding, but his head is so clear and void of pain right now as he hangs on the verge of a fall. If he doesn't see the friction burn, he doesn't have to acknowledge it. He raises his head slowly once his jerking hands find the little bits of the tree that has jutted out into a handhold during its growth. He smears with his feet, moving around to finally rest gently on two more branches, just as frail and breakable as the first. If he smeared any longer, he wouldn't have been able to hold his weight up with his spindly arms and small body. It takes a while longer than the first time since he is now breathing quickly, his heartbeat audible in his ears, but he manages to find the perfect position to reach out for the second, smaller cat. He pauses just as the cat paws at Izuku's tiny fingers. "Wait," he says to the cat despite that humans, in fact, cannot converse with animals. Of course, unless it's a mutation, one with a quirk. Nevertheless, he talks to it. "Do you need help?" The cat, surprisingly, does not respond. "Look," he pulls up a businesslike tone he hears Dad use to converse on the phone that doesn't suit his 6-year-old voice at all as he pushes himself away from the trunk. "I'm gonna carry you, okay? So don't move or we're both gonna fall." The cat blinks and Izuku takes that as a sign that it understands. He smiles and slides his hand under the cat's stomach, that only for it to pounce on him. He reels back, a breath stuck in his throat as he faces the blue of the sky seen through the canopy of leaves above. His arms wrap around the cat and the ticking of his heartbeat slows to a stop. Time winds down to a standstill. It's quite surreal, this moment spent suspended in time. Then again, time is a construct and his mind is what determines the pace of his life. Beams of light passes through between the leaves, creating tiny pools of light reflecting on Izuku's face. It moves and shifts as a gust of wind passes by, the same speed as always, as if Izuku's mind can never stop nature in its course. After all, he is only human and even in a space of his own making, he cannot completely control the sentient flow of nature. The pools of light scatter across Izuku's skin, shifting and blinking as the leaves are shaken by the breeze, just as he feels the strands of his hair tickle against his ear as the wind sweeps through it. The wind blows over and the air stills, settling into the unnatural silence of this scenery. Even the cicadas are gone. There is no sound. Just him and his mind. So what will you do? He asks himself. He's seen the movies, seen the stunt doubles fall from heights larger than this one. They always seem to fall on their feet with their knees bent, then they crumble into a roll to break their fall. Maybe it's to shift all that momentum forward. Of course, Izuku is a 6-year-old with an advanced vocabulary, but that word is still foreign to him. He knows the concept of it though, through experience and observation. When you move fast, he notices, you can never really stop. It's the same as whoever Kaken pushes him. If it's against something that will stop him, it hurts considerably worse than if Kaken just pushes him into empty space. He thinks rolling is to dissipate whatever force is bringing him down to the ground, to push it forward so it will naturally go away instead of being stopped forcefully on a solid. After all, your bones can only take so much pressure. Later on, Izuku would learn about kinetic energy, shock absorption, and energy transfer. But now, he would have to settle for less eloquent explanations. Wait, no, focus. With the way he is now, no reflexes would be able to get him upright enough to pull off a roll to break his fall. Maybe if he lands on his side. No way. He's seen Tsubasa fall after he got his quirk, landing painfully on his right arm. He still clearly remembers it. The audio memory echoes through the forest, a loud and crisp snap. He remembers crying and a purple bruise jutting out below the boy's neck, what he would soon learn to be the telltale sign of a broken collarbone. He involuntarily shivers and files the image away, a mental note never to fall on his shoulder where the impact would go further than he'd think. In the direction he's falling, he should be able to just fall on his back. If he just relaxes, if he doesn't allow his body to be compact, he should be able to lessen the pressure his bones would take when he hits the ground, or, if he falls on his feet and launch himself backwards, that should disperse the force as well. Tick. Izuku takes a deep breath as gravity wraps itself around him, an anchor to make him sink and stay on the forest floor. Tick, tick. The sudden roar of blood in his ears clears his head immediately of all thoughts. Tick, tick, tick. Tick, tick. The telltale beating of his heart resumes at its original pace. The deafening warning of wind rushes past his ears and wreathes his hair around as Izuku falls from his mind palace and from the tree, the sense and concept of time returning, setting Izuku's world into motion once again. There is a thud, followed by nothing. The summer song of cicadas drones on, a constant reminder of the bright sun breaking through the canopy and painting the forest floor in splotches of light, of the unbearable heat the tourists leave behind every year once the snow seeps into the ground, never to be seen again. Lying in this bed of leaves, if Izuku was to scream along with the insects, no one would hear him this far past the creek that he usually plays at with Kaken. If his body broke upon impact, no one would find him until his mom comes looking for him or if Kaken ventures further into the forest. He opens his arms and the cat climbs out, stretching, unbothered. Its body shivers as it brushes past Izuku, purring lazily. When Izuku pushes off the ground with his sore and battered body, he reaches for the cat and the two immediately take off through the thicket of trees, darting in the direction of town. He sighs and stumbles against the tree trunk for a moment before pulling himself upright and grinning. Another job well done. Izuku picks up the yellow backpack he has leaning against the plants and carries on his way. After a few minutes of walking he reaches the streets, and after another few minutes of crying because of the scratches on his arm from the tree bark, he hears a noise. Now, noises aren't an uncommon occurrence, contrary to popular belief, but this noise does sound quite suspicious, especially when it's echoing from an alleyway closed off by a chain fence. He stands on the sidewalk for a beat or two as he contemplates his poor decisions. It doesn't take long to convince himself to go check out the source of the sound and hopefully help out. Izuku launches himself at the chain fence, grappling for purchase before he just falls back on his bottom, the chain-link fence rattling noisily. He huffs, frustrated before shrugging his backpack off and throwing as best he could over the fence. It doesn't go over the fence, a testament to Izuku's measly 6-year-old arm strength, but its strap does catch onto a bit of metal jutting out, probably to ensure the fence doesn't just bend over, Izuku guesses. He climbs after it, chubby fingers barely holding on to the thin holds, and he manages to reach the top and push his backpack over. He topples to the ground after it, realizing that the fence isn't that tall after all. His arms still hurt so much that tears haven't yet dried, but he isn't about to leave someone in trouble. Heroes don't do that. After all, the prospect of danger still hasn't quite registered yet this far in life. Well, it kind of did, but his dad had brought him down these streets before a year or two ago. Over there is where the rich live, Hisashi said, the two of them hand in hand, standing at a corner just 1 block away from the chain-link fence. The houses look so old, Izuku had remarked, staring at the traditional Japanese buildings. Hisashi smiled fondly down at his son. A lot of heroes with legacies live around there. So does that mean that no villains come around here? Izuku looked up at his father, eyes twinkling with awe. It's dangerous for villains around here, yes. Hisashi had stopped smiling when he said that, something akin to warning in his tone. Izuku ignored that and looked at the 2 kids with white hair and one with red running around the front, passing a temari between them. Izuku peers into the darkness and calls, "Are you okay?" Todoroki Tuya wants to die. Has wanted to cease existence for as long as he can remember, and that was when his quirk first manifested. His flames burn the brightest of blue, a white hot that seared into his skin when he set the floor on fire. His legs burned, scarred over an ugly purple, but Tuya couldn't recall the phantom memory of the pain until not long ago. His body couldn't handle the flames much, his father had said when Tuya sat leaning against the dojo's wall, staring at his bandaged legs, numb to any kind of touch one can think of. His father had not relented, opting to train him day in day out, yelling at him to get stronger, that such a weak constitution would not survive long in the hero world. That is, until he turned 11 and Shudo froze the floor then set the ceiling on fire. His father had thrown him away right then and there. In his dead, rotting heart, there was still a burning longing for his father to look at him like he was worth something, for Shudo to be a complete failure and for Endeavor to focus all his training on Tuya. But there was also a disgusting part of him, a loathsome part Tuya hated so much that felt relieved whenever he looked at his little brother. A part that listened to Shudo crying in their mother's arm in the other room and thought, "Thank God that isn't me." Todoroki Tuya is a horrible person. He started to actively wish for death the year after Shudo's quirk manifested. The year Tuya turned 12. The year Todoroki Rei was hospitalized. Their mother couldn't bear to look at Shudo's left side so much that she poured boiling hot water over his head. She hated the face that reminded her so much of him, the red hair, the piercing turquoise eyes. Tuya aches when he thought of how much she must have suffered whenever she so much as glanced at the child that most resembled him in the unruly red hair, piercing turquoise eyes, her firstborn Tuya himself. All save for his thin frame, muscle and fat eaten up by cremation-level fire, Tuya was a tiny carbon copy of Endeavor. He started looking at his hands and wondering if his own fire would be enough to burn away his sins. When he turned 13, Todoroki Tuya killed himself. He started with his arms, and that moment, the moment fire as hot as Tuya's cold blue eyes sparked into existence after having not used it in so long, that was the moment he remembered why he can no longer feel his legs. His screams filled the house and his world was fire, it was pain. And yet that had nothing on the smoke filling his lungs, obstructing his breathing, burning his throat and nostrils in the fight for oxygen. One he would lose as his flames burned hotter than anything, stinging his eyes so much that he believed for a moment he had burned all of his face away. Rage fueled the inferno even more when the first person to find him, the first person to rush towards his pain screams was his father. Endeavor had looked at him with panic, and Tuya told himself it was because a child that died due to a flame quirk would ruin the number 2 hero's reputation a tiny bit. He refused to believe that the man rushed to his aid, wielding the fire extinguisher made specifically for Tuya's destructive ethanol-fueled quirk. His father had taken him to an emergency clinic nearby, the ones set up in places where hospitals would be too far away to be considered an option. They had popped up a few decades ago to combat an increasing number of villains and high crime rates before All Might's debut. An ambulance had arrived from that place in no time, just in time for Tuya to slip into unconsciousness after catching a glimpse of his siblings curled tight around each other, the two younger ones crying into Fuyumi's shirt. When he had awoken, bandages wrapped around him from his jaw down to his collar and arms, he had set the world alight once more. The clinic burned down and the room turned to ash, cremated as the only funeral Todoroki Tuya would ever need. Endeavor was not there. No, never for his failure of a son. So when this bright-eyed gremlin reaches out a hand and asks him if he is okay, Tuya is just about ready to combust once again. No, he is not okay, and no, he doesn't want help from this child looking at him with such concern. But he must have passed out mentally at some point because when he comes to, he's stumbling along on heavily leaning on the green-haired boy. Oni-san, help a bit. Midoriya, what the F dash? Potty mouth. Bring him over here. Someone attempts to sling Tuya's arms over their shoulder, but the moment they touched his bandaged skin, he screams in pain. F dash. She'd call an ambulance. No. Tuya manages through a choked sob. Please don't. Pain engulfs his world once more. The person holding him up swore a few more times before wrapping their arms around his middle, the unbandaged part of his torso. He feels himself lowered onto a leather of some sort and the blinding sunlight disappearing as a shadow is cast over his head and the throbbing behind his eyes subside. We have to call an ambulance, the older-sounding voice says, this time much calmer. Get him to a hospital. Tuya gathers air in his lungs, ready to speak once more as he opens his eyes. He's lying in the back seat of a car, though the car seems to be sunken as he can see a boy around his age crouched on the ground outside, a sea of red behind him that Tuya cannot place. Sitting inside the old, beaten-down car is the green-haired boy that helped him before, his face turned away from Tuya. Just as Tuya's about to open his mouth, the boy beats him to it. We can't, the boy says, so matter-of-factly like it was the most obvious thing in the world. He could be in trouble. The older boy raises a brow, resting his chin in his palm as he leans his elbows on his crouched legs. That's probably why we should get him to the authorities. Tuya notices the boy doesn't carry the same panicked air his voice exuded earlier, but rather, he seems carefree and idle, as if there wasn't a medium-rare Tuya sitting in front on him. Despite what his words might suggest, he seems too bothered to actually call for an ambulance. The green-haired boy, on the other hand, turns to look at Tuya and smiles. What a strange pair. He's running, the boy says with such confidence that Tuya would not be surprised if he actually knows Tuya's entire life story. We can't just hand him over to whatever he's running from. That's not what heroes do. Besides, the boy lowers his voice so it would just be Tuya hearing him. We both know this has something to do with the burning building, right? The older boy outside says something and moves away, taking with him the shifting sea of red to show a blurry backdrop of metal. But Tuya isn't paying attention. He's staring straight at this green-haired boy. How dare he, Tuya thinks. How dare this gremlin look at him with such understanding? How dare he? There is no way this boy with barely a decade under his belt can look at Tuya like that and be able to feel exactly what's going on his head, right? Be able to understand the turmoil that, as far as Tuya knows, has never happened to anyone before. How dare he? This boy can't possibly understand, yet he's looking at Tuya with such tender eyes. So much so that Tuya himself cannot understand either how someone can feel so much empathy at once and not just die. My name is Midoriya Izuku, the boy says brightly. What's your? He cuts off. A beat passes before he continues. Do you want to tell me your name? No. Tuya manages through a croak before delving into a coughing fit. Midoriya rummages through the backpack. He swings from over his shoulder into his lap. He produces a plastic bottle of water, half empty, and uncaps it, pushing it onto Tuya's lips right where the bandages around his jaws end. Pain overcomes him, seizes him for a moment, and Midoriya grabs onto his hands, holding the only bits of bare skin where no fire burned him. Sorry, Oni-san, but you've got to drink a bit. Tuya winces and he remembers Fuyumi and her tired eyes. Don't call me that. The beat. Ni-san. Shudo, who calls him so affectionately, and Natsuo, who tacks on a careless NII to TNII as well, even though he doesn't need to differentiate between two older brothers like Shudo does. Just stick with you. No need to be so formal. I can't do that, Aniki. Aniki. That's fun. Midoriya smiles at Tuya's lack of resistance and claps his hands together. He talks about nothing and everything, and Tuya appreciates the distraction from his world of pain, the distant burn and friction. Soon though, Tuya slips into a realm beyond sleep and Midoriya quiets, hands still holding his. What a strange kid. Shudo cries softly on the floor next to his bed. The screams had started during training, a harsher session from All Might returning to Japan for a bit, but they weren't his own screams. His father's focus had sharpened to zone into the source of the cry, unlike any time there were distractions in Shudo's training. Shudo didn't follow his father's thundering footsteps but curled into himself, hands desperately trying to block out the screams. Fuyumi had come in to grab his hand and drag him outside, Natsuo holding on to her other side. There was smoke coming from further in the house, rising into the sky from somewhere that he couldn't quite place. The house was on fire, he surmised. It should have been expected considering the amount of fire quirks in their household, but they should have been able to control it relatively well. They've all evacuated at least, and Endeavor is off being the number 2 hero. Where's Tuyanai? Shudo voiced the sudden realization. The other two didn't meet his eye. Out of all their siblings, Tuya was the one Shudo knew best. Endeavor barely let him talk to Fuyumi or Natsuo for longer than the occasional times they were alone without him. They didn't eat together. They didn't play together. But Tuya he knew. Kind big brother Tuya snuck him sweets. Tiny sour drops or hard candy that can be consumed in seconds, ones he won't get caught eating. Sometimes, Tuya would sneak into his room at night and soothe his nightmares, would slide his head the same way his mother would and speak softly to him. You don't have to be a hero, you know? Shudo had always liked the quality of his brother's voice, a husky sound that had broke earlier that year. Shudo would sob into his shirt and never be able to say anything intelligible. But his brother would understand. Your life shouldn't be sad for you, Todoroki Shudo. And he would not say anything more. So when an ambulance, not a traditional kind he realizes, but the ones parked just barely visible inside the clinic near them, arrived and a smoking form was carted away, hooked up to emergency tubes, he cried. Fuyumi pulled his head to her chest, attempting to block his view of the thin frame that didn't fit. Endeavor went with them. Came back an hour later to check on the rest of his children, his shirt soaked through with sweat that wasn't there during the training session. He left a bit later when he got a call, wearing a distressed expression. Hours later he returned to them with grim news. So tonight, Shudo cries. He doesn't understand why this is happening to them, why Tuya was gone and why he was hurting. The door creaks open and Shudo freezes up, trying to wipe the tears away, to hide them. It's just me, Fuyumi says softly. Shudo looks up. It's strange to see her in his room. She moves to sit in front of him on the floor and pushes an object to sit between them. Shudo stares, and when there's no explanation he asks, "What's that?" "Onii, Tuyanai's phone," she says. She pulls out her own and calls Tuya's number. When they wait and let the line go to voicemail, they hear it. "Hey, this is Todoroki Tuya. You've probably called the wrong number because I wouldn't have given you mine. Unless you're Yumi or Natsu or Shudo, then shoot." That voice, low and bored, sang his name. His brother's voice brought tears to his eyes once more. Because he missed it already. Because he realizes he'll never be able to hear his brother soothing him, patting his head down, not anymore. He will never sneak candy to him, a mischievous grin on his face as he raised a finger in the universal sign for quiet, a little secret between them. He will never tuck Shudo into bed and gently pat his bruised cheeks, a pained glint in his eyes. He will never shovel food onto Shudo's plate, trying to keep energy in his voice despite his exhausted state as he tells him he's a growing boy. Tears gone. Keep it, and when you get your own phone when you're older, call it every day. Just so he's with us again. What's going on here? The dark silhouette of Endeavor's form looms over them, plunging the two into his shadow as he stands blocking the only light from the hallway in the doorframe. Both of their hearts seize in their throat, Fuyumi freezes up and her breath shakes while Shuto instinctively curls into himself. She stands up just as Shuto tries to hide the phone under his shirt. "I'm sorry, Dad," she says, not meeting his eyes. Her fists shake where they're clenched around wrinkled skirt. "I'm just comforting Shuto. It's a stressful day." She stays between them like that for a moment, but a grunt from Endeavor has her running and squeezing through the doorway. Shuto is surprised Endeavor doesn't stop her. A moment of silence passes before Endeavor steps into the room and Shuto holds the phone so tight it might have broken. "What did Fuyumi give you?" So commanding his tone. Shuto wonders if he does it on purpose or not, and he concludes he's probably been like this since he can speak. "It's..." Shuto mumbles. "Speak up, boy." Endeavor does not raise his voice. "It's Tiani's phone." She said if I call it, I can hear his voice again. Shuto, staring down at the ground, sees Endeavor tense up at the corner of his eye. He prepares to be hit, or for the phone to be wrenched away, a foregone conclusion almost. "Don't just lie down and wait for me to take it." Shuto looks up in surprise. Endeavor's looking down, no flaming beard, no trace of fire. Only cold, hard eyes. "If you want to keep the phone, you be prepared to defend it. This stance isn't going to stop anyone." Shuto's mouth is catching flies at this point. Endeavor scoffs. What kind of world would it be when the #1 hero is this weak he can't even protect a phone? And his father walks away. In the future, Todoroki Shuto will find out that his father, Todoroki Enji, continues to pay the phone bill for the old mobile even 10 years from now. But that is neither here nor there. Todoroki Tuya fades into just a memory of a sweltering summer day and an old mobile phone at the bottom of his drawers. "For eternity, keep staying here, stay. You are my soulmate. Longer than 7 summers and cold winters. Longer than numerous promises and memories." The shoplifter makes a dash for it, but Izuku's been watching him for a while and pounces on him. He misses, but Izuku manages to catch on the thief's trousers, making him fall and all the things he's pocketed spilling forth from his barely closed backpack. "What the kid?" The thief looks back, surprised to find a 9-year-old clinging to his trousers. He tries to kick Izuku away, but the boy holds on tight, not about it let him go. He stops though when a pair of legs come to stop level with his face. He looks up sheepishly, plastering on a smile only to come face to face with the shopkeeper looking down at him, arms crossed. And glancing pointedly at the unpaid objects spilling across the floor. A few minutes later, the thief, the shopkeeper, and Izuku, much to the former's protest, sits down in the back room together. Izuku fiddles with the wrapping of a lemon drop the shopkeeper offered him, twisting at the tough puzzle of actually opening the sweet. The thief stutters, "Peel, just please don't call the police, I promise I'll never come back." Tachibana-san, that's right, the thief had given his name earlier in attempts to stop the shopkeeper from immediately phoning the police. "I can't just let this slide. You shoplifted in this place, if I don't show people there are consequences, they'll keep trying to do it. And I won't have good Izuku here to catch them all." "No, Tachibana reasoned, his words tripping all over the place. "Shopkeeper-san," Izuku cuts the thief off, looking up, "can't we just let it slide this once?" That's an interesting phrase, he muses. He's heard it a few times, though not enough to make sense of it, but when put in this context, he's kind of figured what it meant now, much to his delight. "Look, Izuku," the shopkeeper says, sighing, "Tachibana-san here seems like a nice kid." "Yeah," Izuku reasons, "so you don't want him?" "Her," Tachibana spoke up after having stayed silent for a while. "I'm her." "She." The shopkeeper frowned at that, trying to catch a good look at Tachibana, who's refusing to meet either of their eyes. Izuku just gasps, putting a hand over his mouth in silent apology. Then he continues. "So you don't want her to get in trouble with the authorities, right?" Izuku tries the charming tone his father uses. "She must have been in a bad place to resort to stealing, which I'm guessing is the lack of a job." "Bingo," Izuku thinks when he sees the flinch from the corner of his eye, "and having a criminal record would worsen her chance of getting a new one, wouldn't it? This could potentially ruin her future, I'm sure you know, shopkeeper-san. After all, you look wise enough with your age, so I have no clue why you're hesitant to not call the police at all." He sounds just like his dad. Here, Izuku picks out a few of the products on the table he deems as necessary out of the pile of things Tachibana wanted to steal. A bottle of painkillers, one look at her sharp teeth, the most nutritious convenience store food can get, her irritation, the hungry glances, and basic toiletries. She doesn't seem fond of the stubble growing. He pushed them over to pile in front of Tachibana, then rifles through his own backpack before pulling out a wad of cash. I'll pay for it. The adults blink owlishly at Izuku. What? No, you don't. You can't just encourage this behavior. It's fine, Izuku says. My mom gave me this for snacks and I haven't gotten any in weeks, so I have it accumulated. Another new word Izuku learned earlier in the week, and won't be using it anytime soon. It's not a lie, exactly. His mom did give him the money, but he's been saving up for months just for today when the all-might Nendoroid would go on sale. He's been excited all week, so he'd be lying if he was to say he wouldn't be reluctant to part with the cash. You still can't. Kid, that's not how life works. Oh look. Izuku says suddenly. He holds the things he's about to purchase and waltzes out of the back room, the two adults hurrying after him. He places the wad of cash on the counter. I accidentally left my money on the counter. He dances outside and leaves the things, now in a plastic bag, sitting just on the door. Oops, he says, fake gasping. I forgot my things here too. If no one takes it, it'll rot there forever. If someone tries to return it to me, I'll run away. I'm not supposed to talk to strangers. In the end, after a fair bit of convincing and arguing, Izuku and Tachibana walk side by side down the street with the latter carrying a plastic bag of food, painkillers, and toiletries. Can I call you Takchan? TTD Taken? Tachibana's face turns beet red and her voice squeals. I'm sorry. Izuku put a hand over his mouth to cover his mistake. You're older than me, so should I call you Wani-san instead? And no, Tachibana says, then adds in a smaller voice, Takshan is fine. Nice to meet you, Takshan. Izuku smiles brightly. I'm Midoriya Izuku. Tachibana Hiroyuki. Her voice falters at the end. Actually, she amends, it's just Tachibana Yuki. Are you in a bad place right now, Takshan? Izuku asks bluntly. Tachibana idly kicks the stray bits of gravel on the concrete, looking down. I can't find a stable job right now and Izuku lightly slams the base of his fist into his open palm in a gesture of realization. He excitedly speaks, there's a ramen place not far from here. They were looking for help and I offered to just help around the shop, but they said they wouldn't employ someone without paying them, let alone a 9-year-old. Tachibana's mouth is catching flies now as she gapes at the bright child. In all her years of life, never has she been witness to a force that can rival the very sun itself. Never has she seen such intense sincerity, such a genuine longing to help people with not even a hint of an ulterior motive in mind. Takchan. Izuku raises his hands, worried. Are you crying? Tachibana sniffs into her sleeve. No, I'm not. Izuku skips along the beachfront, a wide smile across his face and the familiar warmth accompanied by helping someone blooming in his chest. He troops across the sand, occasionally jumping from scraps of metal to hunks of metal. After one particularly tricky bit of an obstacle to avoid, he looks up and beams when he spots two familiar heads of hair. He calls out, Aniki, Oniai-san. When they first talked to each other, the two boys did not get along at all. They were both laid back in their own way, but the difference is that Kigo just carries that air of laziness with him everywhere he goes while Dabi always kind of sits around aimlessly, as if he had nothing to do. People would think they'd get along swimmingly, but Dabi feels too strongly about his beliefs to let up to someone like Kigo. Even now, they're arguing among themselves. A hero's purpose is to save people out of the goodness of their hearts, Dabi says. He's sitting with his back straight on a stack of household appliances, bandaged, arms crossed. Even to this day, Izuku has never seen Dabi without those bandages covering him. They seem to have been changed every now and then when Kigo and Izuku weren't there, but he's not sure when Dabi has time to do that. Izuku ignores their conversation and pulls the usual mattress he uses out into the open and flops down on it. He rifles through his backpack and procures his hero journal before furiously starting to write in it. But being a hero is a job, isn't it? Kigo asks idly. There's something in his voice Izuku can't quite place, a chilling facade that does not betray Kigo's true intelligence. Dabi is eyeing him skeptically now, aware he's walking into a trap of sorts but not ready to back down. You can't just expect someone to do a job without pay. And before Dabi can reply, Kigo continues, and you're allowed to be a hero because you enjoy the fame or you enjoy using your quirk. Something comes alight in Dabi's eyes and he lurches forward, but they can't just neglect their duties for fame. Or put fame above saving people. Take your idol for example. He says the word with so much venom and hatred that Kigo flinches back and Izuku looks up from his notes. Endeavor cares about being the #1 hero more than actually saving anyone. He chases down villains just for publicity and leaves the people to fend for themselves. No, he doesn't. This time Dabi is the one to flinch when Kigo says this with such conviction. Izuku goes back to writing and hums the theme to the latest All Might movie. Endeavor never leaves to chase the villains unless there is another hero on the scene. Did you know Endeavor is credited with the most hero arrests and solved investigations in Asia? And #3 in the whole world. Even more than All Might. Doesn't excuse the fact that he's an a-hole, Dabi mutters defiantly. Kigo compromises in a drawl, trying to settle the argument, well as long as he doesn't hurt anyone. Dabi opens his mouth, turquoise fire in his eyes, but he looks like he has to physically restrain himself from saying whatever he wants to. Instead, he hisses out, "You know nothing, Takami. Oni-san, what's your hero name gonna be?" Izuku pipes up, his clear voice cutting through the tension like a knife through butter. Kigo leans back on his wings, folding his forearms behind his head. He smiles weakly at Izuku while Dabi slips off the pile he was sitting on, the rusted metal of the thrown-away appliances creaking against each other as his weight lifts off. "Why do you think I'm gonna be a hero?" Oni-san asks. Izuku looks down at the word-filled page of his hero journal, charcoal smudges painting little finger-shaped prints into the line paper. To a foreign eye his handwriting looks like chicken scratch, but he understands the words perfectly, eyes flitting over his work appreciatively. Name: Takami Kigo, hero name. Quirk: Fierce wings. As a hero, his quirk allows him to be versatile and fill in the role of any missing member in a team, making him the perfect hero. He looks back up to meet Kigo's eyes. "Why wouldn't you?" That seems to startle both of the older boys, Dabi pausing as he moves to sit next to Izuku and Kigo seems taken aback. "You've got the perfect quirk for heroism, not many people have that. It's a privilege and being a hero is every child's dream, isn't it?" Izuku smiles, the curve strained. "You barely have to work hard at all and you can just become a hero." "Midoriya," Kigo says, his voice smooths over and turning cold in a way that it's never been before. Kigo had always been jovial, his voice so loose in its texture. "It's not that simple. You're going to UA, right?" Izuku's eyes sparkle with an untested admiration. "Because we're so lucky to live in Mizudafu so close to the best hero school in Japan, we get to go to All Might's alma mater. And you also have the perfect." "I'm not going to UA." A moment passes and Izuku's face drops. "What?" Kigo smiles, the ice melting as if it was never there and returning to his carefree demeanor. "I'm leaving in a few months' time. Moving, actually," he explains. "But you're going to a hero school, right?" Izuku lurches forward to get closer to Kigo, but Dabi grabs his wrist and cuts off whatever Oni-san was about to say. "Izuku." Despite his volume, Izuku hears him. "What's this?" "What's what?" Izuku looks down to where Dabi had grabbed and frowns when he unfurls his fingers to reveal the red, swollen markings beneath his touch. Snaking faintly from the handprint-shaped burn held tightly almost aligned with Dabi's hold and curling up onto his shoulders beneath his sleeves are burns. They aren't too bad, a pinkish color where his skin almost peels, but Izuku's so used to them the pain barely bothers him anymore. "Did that Kaken do this to you?" Ice coats his tongue, the very same ice in Kigo's voice, but colder, cold like the hot flames of Dabi's turquoise eyes, a numbing sound. "It's not that bad," Izuku reasons calmly, but his mind is running a mile a minute, thinking up excuses that will keep Kaken from getting done in by Dabi's wrath, but coming up empty. He's used most of it up in the past 2 years he's met the two older boys. A thump sounds and sand scatters in a ring around where Kigo lands as he asks, "I thought you said he stopped?" "It doesn't hurt, really." Izuku is hurrying out the words now. "Besides, I'm okay with it." "It's not okay," Dabi growls. There is pain in his eyes when he looks at Izuku, grit in his voice as if it's physically hurting him to talk to Izuku, to talk about this. "It shouldn't be okay. Midoriya, you have to tell someone," Kigo is adding on now. "You shouldn't have to be okay with him hurting you." Dabi is raising his voice, anger bleeding through the hot ice of his words. "This isn't normal, Izuku." Izuku only understands them on a theoretical level, and a level created by his extreme empathy. He would be mad too, would be furious and angry and filled with all kinds of rage as well if either of the two boys allowed someone to hurt them the way Izuku has let Kaken beat him. But he doesn't know how to explain the deep empathy he feels for Kaken to the older boys. He doesn't know how to tell them simply that it's always been Kaken's dream to be a hero and it's not his fault he grew up with a mother who solves things through violence, and that if Izuku is to report him for bullying then it would ruin his chances of ever getting into a respectable hero school. So he looks to Kigo. "Stop changing the subject," Izuku says, changing the subject. "You just said you were gonna leave. You can't just leave us here." Kigo sighs lazily, tipping backwards and giving the impression he would fall. Instead he floats to the ground, his wings controlled so that he won't have to put any effort into lying down. And for that moment, Kigo talks and they choose to forget the burns. For now. And his quirk would be the counter to Toxic Chainsaw. A few weeks before now, the infamous Toxic Chainsaw slipped through the grasps of the #1 hero, All Might, sparking fear throughout the region of the battle. For Izuku though, the typical hero enthusiast has created yet another original hero character. He presents the hero to Dabi and Kigo, talking extensively about the made-up backstory of Toxic Chainsaw's long-lost brother, Blight. "Ooh," Kigo applauses lightly, a lazy smile gracing his lips while Aniki seems to have fallen asleep halfway through his enthusiastic explanation. "Why's he called Blight?" "Well, I was going through different connotations for toxic." Izuku then proceeds to ramble about the etymology of the word blight and how that relates to the plant-based quirk the hero character has. Currently, he's dressed over his normal outfit, the too big neon pink puffer jacket that hides his hands he found lying around the dump that is Dagoba Beach. Between his fingers hang a gas mask that he used to demonstrate the character's full hero outfit, the glass cracked in a way that suggests use, not mishandling. "I was thinking of making this my hero outfit when I become a hero," Izuku had said when he had donned the jacket in front of Kigo, who only wore a sad smile. Since they met, he's gone through multiple phases like this: an All Might-based outfit, present Mic-based outfit, and a Gang Orca-based outfit, cycling through heroes and holding on desperately to the notion that he could be a hero. Neither of the other boys said a thing about his inability to do so, and Izuku's starting to question whether they actually believe in him or not. When Izuku's finished, he pauses. Kigo looks the same, his face frozen in a smile, Dabi in the middle of yawn as he rubs at the eye bags he's been sporting for the past weeks. The world slows to a standstill and Izuku's back in his own head. He hasn't done this in a while, delving into his mind, thinking a million thoughts in the span of a second. He's almost a bit disappointed he's doing this for something so trivial. What's the time? There's a part of him, a part that thinks in a train running on a parallel track to his primary thoughts, and it's counting each second as it goes by as long as he's conscious, starting from the last clock he saw. There's always a few disruptancies, little disturbances that pull the train off track for a moment and derail the constant ticking. But no matter what time it actually is, he's definitely late. "Ah!" Izuku exclaims as the world lurches back into motion. "I gotta go." Kigo grunts lazily, lying back down to use Dabi's stomach as a cushion, the latter boy letting out a soft noise in protest. "Your dad's coming back, right?" "Yes." Izuku scrambles to get out of the character's clothes, throwing them into the oven where he stores his findings around the beach. "And I'm late." Izuku waves furiously at the two boys, only one waving back, and scoops up his backpack, setting off in a mad dash to get home. It doesn't take long to get from the beach to his flat, but with Izuku's short legs and weak stamina, he's heaving by the time he bursts through the front door. He runs into the kitchen, looking around, desperately trying to catch even a glimpse of pale hair. He only sees his mother, Inko, sitting at the dining table with an absent look on her face, not noticing Izuku coming in. Izuku slowly makes his way over to her and pulls at her sleeve. Inko snaps out of her stupor and looks down to Izuku, her mouth open in an O. "Where's Papa?" Izuku asks, his head tilting to the side. For a second 1,000 emotions flicker through her face and Izuku's heart drops, already knowing what she is about to say. "He's not going to join us for dinner," she forces out, smiling what might as well be a grimace. "Oh." Izuku looks down at his feet. But Inko tries to amend herself, slinking off the chair to crouch before Izuku and places a hand on his shoulder. "Papa will come see you tonight. He'll come say good night." Izuku plasters on a smile and ushers Inko back into her seat. "It's okay, Mom." He climbs up on the seat opposite hers. He knows exactly why Hisashi doesn't want to play house with him, a useless, quirkless son that would only embarrass him further. "We'll just celebrate my birthday with the two of us." Hisashi does come at night, his hand in Izuku's hair waking him up. Izuku squints at the shadow, but he only sees a flash of a smile before Hisashi leaves his room, a crack of light falling into the dark. Izuku climbs out of bed to put his ear near the opening. "Sorry," Hisashi says. "You can't do this to me," Inko is saying, and Izuku wants to punch his dad for causing the wobble in her voice. "You can't do this to him." I know, Inko." His father's voice is soft, barely audible that Izuku has to strain. "Promise me you'll be back," Inko demands, and Izuku hears the table sliding. He pictures the scene, building it up in his mind with the position of the voices and the environmental cues, Inko pushing Hisashi back against the table, her small hands tightly gripping his collar, or the lapels of his suit jacket. "I can't." "Promise me." "Just this one, Hisashi." A silence. "I promise." Inko scoffs. "You were always a liar." Izuku pushes off the wall beside the door and slips back under the covers. The next day, when Izuku asks Inko whether his dad will come back, she breaks down in tears. Everyone is always in pain. Whether it's a loose hangnail, a sore joint, a cramped back muscle, something. No human is never not in at least a minute amount of pain. The people in his life left one by one. Hisashi was barely ever there after his quirk didn't manifest, but seeing his mother confirm with her tears that he was never coming back still hurt. Kigo left without a word, a complete surprise to both Izuku and Dabi. The latter had been furious, and maybe Izuku would have been too, but for the longest time he's learned to shift and file and shove those feelings that cloud his mind into neat little compartments, ready to take out but locked tight and professional. He wondered, of course, if Kigo knew that the meeting would be their last before he would go on to disappear on them, and if it was, how the older boy had so expertly hid his emotions. It might be equal parts due to the fact that Kigo didn't feel all that upset that he was leaving, as if the past years only amounted to nothing between them, but Izuku entertained the idea that Kigo was that skilled at lying that even Izuku's perceptive eyes couldn't even pick it out. He wondered how many times Kigo had lied with a smile on his face and Dabi and Izuku had eaten up every single word of it. He chose not to dwell on it due to the spiraling feeling in the pit of his stomach that suspected everything their friendship was built on had been a lie. When Izuku turns 11, he only sees Dabi once a week on Saturdays. They've kept in touch since Kigo, but Izuku sees him drifting away slowly, ever so slightly like a paper boat on calm water. Deep down he knows Dabi would not want to hang around with a useless, quirkless kid, but he still wants to hold on to the remnants of normality that they used to share, the only friend he has left other than his own mind, who at times feels more like an enemy. He can't expect things to stay the same, he tells himself. Not when Katsuki grows more violent. Not when his mother comes home late and exhausted. Not when Dabi finally takes off his bandages, his patchwork of scars on full display. Not when his very existence seems to push people away, to repel anyone he comes in contact with. And if everything is going to change, he tells himself, he will have to change with it. "Can you teach me how to fight?" Izuku asks Dabi on the few days they see each other at the beach. Dabi looks at him, languid in a way so different from when they first met, the skittish boy who looked over his shoulder at every out-of-place noise. Why? So I can train to be a hero, Izuku says enthusiastically. Everyone else has the head start that is their quirk, and if Izuku isn't given the same privilege, then he will have to make the unpaved road easier for himself. But Dabi answers curtly and with finality, no. If I can't use quirks, then I'll rely on skill and support. Wait, why? Izuku cries out, disappointed. Because you're like a child, he says with a tone Izuku has come to associate with an undirected disgust, ambiguous in a way he can't seem to figure out. So, Dabi repeats, looking at him incredulously. So you shouldn't be wasting your childhood trying to waste your adulthood. It's not wasting if it's following my dreams, Izuku says, eyes sparkling in the innocent, oblivious way he knows will stir some protective instinct within Dabi. Besides, if I try to throw myself into danger without proper training, wouldn't that be worse? Dabi grits his teeth in frustration, massaging the bridge of his nose. You're so naive. Except he isn't. Izuku has never been, is not, and will never be naive. He's not stupid nor clueless. He knows, or at least, has an inkling as to why Dabi holds a particular hatred towards heroics. Something about child soldiers and collateral damage and fake heroes. And though Izuku isn't trying to invalidate whatever trauma Dabi has clearly gone through in the past, he has however pushed the empathy down ever so slightly in place of the pure determination he holds close to his heart. Dabi agrees reluctantly and Izuku cheers. I'm only teaching you basic self-defense, okay? Dabi says as they stand across from each other on the beach. Somehow, it completely slips his mind to wonder how Izuku even found out that Dabi could fight. That's more than enough. That's all Izuku needs anyways. There are videos he can access online now that, over the course of a month that Dabi still semi-regularly visits the beach, he's nailed down the balance and movements. Although it feels mechanical without experience, Izuku still commits the movements to memory, copying the videos on YouTube to the very shift of weight. And while he's convinced he's not naive, he is still far too underprepared, still a child despite his confidence in his abilities and intellect. Whatever training he's taken upon himself will be thrown out the window when he's faced with true danger, with a fear so primal it leaves him only with the barest of his most feral instincts. His first real fight starts, unsurprisingly, when he's dragged by his collar to the school's backyard and slammed against a wall, his breath knocking out of him. He slides against the wall in time with the sweat gathering and slipping along his throat as the blistering heat of Katsuki's fist emanates against his jugular like a threat. Katsuki is saying something that Izuku can see from the shapes he's making with his mouth, but Izuku is too tired to try and make out what he's saying, nor can he even try to process anything audible at the moment. In the spaces between when he's learning and when he leaves school, Izuku's learned to shut his mind off completely, distancing himself from his own physical body. That includes turning sound into muddled slush that slides in one ear and out the other as he's doing right now. Deku, he seems to be saying, but Izuku can guess that most of the time. Someone's grabbed his bag when he was dragged earlier and he can see them rummaging through it in the corner of his eyes. Hero Journal for the Future number 11. Izuku's eyes widen when the lackey brings the notebook out and the blurry world fades into crystal-sharp clarity around him. A dog barking in the small side streets far away, a rhythmic sound of basketballs against the gym floor, scraping shoes of the one lackey standing with nothing to do kicking at the ground, the bright blue sky flaring just enough that Izuku squints from the sudden focus, sweet nitroglycerin and undertones of smoke, dry taste of nothing turning his tongue to cotton, sweat-soaked uniform sticking to his back, scraped palms from bracing against the wall, throbbing head from when it knocked against the hard surface. Katsuki speaks. You're still doing this, you effendi nerd? Katsuki is younger than him, but Izuku's never heard someone swear so much and be so blatantly rude as the other boy has been. Katsuki grabs the notebook from the lackey's hands. Izuku's breath catches in his throat. So effing creepy, Katsuki scoffs, flicking through it carelessly. This isn't going to help you a bit if you're born quirkless and useless like you. The smell, that smell of sweet burning, coupled with his hands glowing up a molten red, Izuku knows better than anyone what he's going to do. He lurches forward out of one of the lackey's lax grip, both hands coming up to cross each other, one hand grabbing the book and the other holding Katsuki's hand away. Surprise colors his face and Izuku drops the notebook safely to the side immediately, eyes burning with an intensity that draws Katsuki's gaze to him, only on him. Ignore the book, don't think about the book, don't look at it, don't touch it. Die. Katsuki's hands, combusting with small explosions, come towards him in his deadly left hook. For a moment the world buffers and Dabi is standing in front of him. You're weak, Izuku. Smoke trails from his fingers, a devastating arc straight towards him. It's 'cause I'm small. I'll get stronger. The rage and indignation is morphed with that manic grin Katsuki sports at all times. It's not always about strength, you know. Most people in this society are going to be bigger than you. The person I trained with, he was substantially larger. Intimidating? Katsuki is not much bigger than him. He doesn't sport much of a hulking figure given that he's barely 11. But he is intimidating in a way Izuku knows in his very bones, and the incoming blow sends fear shooting through his blood, paralyzing him in cages of icy veins. Your defense will only be as strong as their attacks are. Use that. Izuku shifts his head to the side to dodge the fist, arms sliding up to lock Katsuki's arm and turn. Methodical, mechanical, precise. It's too rehearsed it looks unnatural and strangely stiff, but Izuku doesn't falter. Katsuki slams into the ground. Silence. He sees the look of shock displayed around him and the frozen expression Katsuki is wearing as he looks up at him. He sees Dabihu's Nashobi smile, lips stretched unnaturally in a very not-to-be-like way. He turns and his tattered cloak dissolves into blue flames, swallowing him with it. Izuku can't shake the feeling of wrongness as he stares at the empty space the phantom had occupied. His fingers that had grabbed Katsuki's wrist numbs, butter and ice creeping up his limbs. A horrid feeling starts in his stomach, an empty chasm-like feeling of falling that bubbles up in his chest, an unbidden pressure that squeezes and crumples and grabs at his lungs, leaving him choking on a huge lump of nothing with nowhere to go. Kaken, he's sure he says, but he could be imagining it, what with his tongue weighing like lead. He sees Katsuki move, but he's too paralyzed to take any action as blooming flowers of explosions burst against his face, causing him to stumble back in pain, burning, scorching, bleeding pain that sends him to his knees. He grabs at his face, a scream tearing out of his throat, recoiling from his own hands as if it burned him even more than Katsuki did. He mutters Katsuki's name again, a pathetic, whimpering, Kaken. What the F dash? Katsuki screams, towering over his fallen form. Just because you learn a few tricks you think you're better than me, Deku? No, Izuku wants to say, but he knows if he even utters a peep that Katsuki would sear and burn through his skin even more than he already did. Any retort or retaliation would be seen as an act undermining Katsuki's strength, any contradiction akin to challenging him. Katsuki picks him up by the collar and throws him one last time, his head knocking against the wall and a soft oomph escaping him. Don't offend to touch me, the boy spits on him. Izuku averts his gaze. They leave. It might have been minutes or hours because when he picks himself back up, trudging over to the worn notebook he threw to safety, the sky is painted in orange. He picks it up, examining it, and sighs in relief when the only evidence of Katsuki's vandalism is just a small singe in the corner of the paper. For the past years he's avoided showing his notebook or bringing it to school anymore, but he must have forgotten to take it out after one night of chasing hero fights. It's only a moment, a slight sting of the wind on his raw cheeks that flicks a SWH in his mind, and suddenly all senses in his body come alive, tingling and sizzling, and he gasps. He just threw Bokugu Katsuki. He, quirkless, useless, weak Deku just grabbed Katsuki and brought him to the ground. He brought the strongest person he knows, the most gifted, always praised for his power, he brought Katsuki down. Something blooms in his chest, a mental whiplash to the stifling panic from earlier, and he grins from ear to ear, pain already forgotten. Izuku isn't weak. He laughs, delighted. He's not weak. Maybe in the future he would look back and see the signs, notice the hunger in his grubby hands, and he would think maybe he should have been more careful. His hubris would be the end of him. Like father, like son. He skips away with his backpack, humming and thinking and planning. Anticipation spikes when he thinks about training, about getting stronger, about reaching out and grabbing the future he wants. The future he will get, no matter what anyone says. He stops at the beach, using Dobby's emergency stash of medical supplies to clean up the scrapes and the cooling burn, and heads straight home just as the sun sinks below the horizon. Mama! Izuku cries into the house. Mama! As he bounds into the living room, he slows to a stop when he spots Inko lying on the couch asleep by herself. He tiptoes over to her, looking over to the bowl of noodles probably cold on the table, then back at her. Inko stirs as Izuku plants a kiss on her cheek. Mama, Izuku whispers, I'm gonna be a hero. Inko's eyes flutter open and she blearily looks at him. He's half sure she's barely awake. Izuku! My Izuku, she groans. Mama? What happened to you? Her hands come up to cup his face. It's nothing, the lighting just makes it look worse than it actually is, he smiles. Her unfocused gaze searches his expression for something. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, Mama. I'm a horrible mother. No. Izuku grabs her hand, cutting her off. You're the best mama anyone could have asked for. Please don't leave me, she whispers with no preemption, as if she's drifted into an entirely different conversation. I won't. Izuku furrows his brow in confusion but holds her hand anyway, kneeling down so he's on eye level with her. No, Mama, what are you talking about? I'm right here. Please, she whimpers, tears welling in her half-closed eyes. Not again. At those words, he schools his features. Don't be, if you're a hero you won't come back. I will, Mama. I'm not gonna die, Izuku reassures her with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Inko finally looks at him, finally with eyes focused, although obstructed by tears. A familiar watery smile greets him and Izuku can't help the lump in his throat. You're all the same in the end. With that, she grumbles something unintelligible and turns over, hands detaching from Izuku's. Izuku gapes at her, wondering what those cryptic words could mean. What could the plural you mean? Is it him and Hisashi? But no, if it is she would say, both, instead of all. His mind runs again, hopping onto a train track to run the thoughts through his head. All. She could mean children, referring to another conversation they had about how mature he is as a child. He has to be, after all, to avoid the hurt. He contemplates the words, the sudden, strange, and out-of-place interaction he just had. Izuku is a smart kid, but he also knows enough to write something like that off as sleep talk. He thinks of that time when he was 4, watching All Might climb over rubble with a dozen civilians on his back, his mom holding him with tears streaming down her eyes. She apologized over and over again as if some defect Izuku had was her fault in any way. Shifting and filing and shoving those sheets of experiences away into compartments of memory, Izuku plasters a grin on his face despite the fact that no one is awake to see it. I'll be a hero, Mama, he assures her sleeping form. And I'm not going to die. I promise. The next morning neither of them acknowledge the exchange they had. Izuku has a hunch that Inko doesn't even remember. He doesn't bring it up just in case anyways. Before Izuku leaves for school, Inko calls after him. Izuku! He turns to her, the corner of his lips lifting on instinct. Inko studies his face from across the room for a moment before her expression melts into a heartfelt smile. I'm making katsudon for dinner today, she tells him. Izuku's heart swells with love and affection for his mother and he nods furiously, excitement bubbling within him. He hasn't been having a good few months, save for the small sessions with Dabi where they mostly just mess around, to the protests of Izuku who wanted his friend to teach him to fight seriously, and it feels like his life is just starting to look up for the first time in years. He beat Katsuki for the first time, his mom is reconnecting with him, and the sky just seems all the more brighter. It even seems Izuku is succeeding at avoiding his bullies at school as well. That is, until at the end of the day when they pull him aside, a mirror image from yesterday save for the fact that Izuku is actually reacting to them this time. You're getting cocky today, Katsuki sneers. I see you smiling the whole time in class. You're smug, aren't you? Izuku shakes his head, eyes widening. No. You think you're FING better than me because you pulled off a fluke? Huh. Kaken. You're still calling me that. Katsuki screams in his face, spittle flying. You're patronizing me. The other lackeys pipe up. Yeah, Deku-kun, just because you get good grades doesn't mean you're above us. Especially with no quirk. They laugh. One of the girls steps forward with a disdained expression. A quirkless freak like you shouldn't even be in this school. She opens a milk carton and pours it over Izuku's head. A boy with a nasally voice cackles, leaning into Izuku's space. I bet they're going to come and take you away to be cured. So you don't infect us. Katsuki's lackeys consist of 4 other people. Ohara-san, she's 14th in class, not keen on studying. Hangs out with delinquent girls in high school. She has mild control of the currents in her body. Izuku thinks of the applications of such a wonderful quirk, which could include numbing physical pain, but the girl would never be creative enough to think of or try anything like that. She has a weak right knee, which results in back pain, and Izuku already knows how to take advantage of that in a fight. Kageyama-kun. He's planning on transitioning later in the year, though he currently wears a binder. He's 5th in class, effortlessly smart, though Izuku knows his grades will drop if he doesn't start studying. He wants to warn the boy that when he's older his depression will kill him from the fall and disappointment of being a former gifted kid. If Izuku plays the long game, however, he can take advantage of that and psychologically lower his morale until he can't even bring himself to bully Izuku. He has a small illusion quirk, but Izuku just knows it has so much potential that will never be harnessed. Tsubasa-kun, one of Izuku's childhood friends. The boy skips school a lot, and there are rumors he's moving out next year to live with his grandfather in middle school. His quirk gives him appealing leather wings that are oh so powerful. Izuku remembers when they were young trying to see how high the boy can fly, just as well as he remembers when he fell and broke his collarbone. If they ever get into a fight, that's where Izuku would aim, because not only would it make Tsubasa flinch back, it would definitely conjure up mild trauma from the accident. His brain had made plans before of how he would permanently impair those wings, but he had shut it down before the idea could blossom. Itami-kun, an ultimately boring character, but a vicious boy with a nasally voice. His nasally voice and reptile skin grazes wrongly against Izuku, but he tries not to discriminate against mutation quirks, considering the fact that he's quirkless himself. But even then, Izuku searched up weaknesses of reptilian animals when he was young, noting down how he can artificially engineer a cold environment that would ensure near cold-blooded animals would perish in. Izuku watches all of them with a sharp gaze, although disguised with meek espimsen to get them off his back as soon as possible. His mom's made katsudon, and he wants to get home as quickly as possible to catch her when she's still awake. Katsuki, however, sees straight through him. Why the F are you looking at us like that, huh? He growls like a wild animal. Bakugo Katsuki, his childhood friend. Really, Izuku doesn't want to blame him for putting him through hell in his school years. This is their last year of elementary school, and he knows it would be even worse in middle school, when his ego grows, or when he realizes he's a big fish in a small pond. That's when Katsuki will come back to torment someone that's lower than him. But Izuku doesn't blame him. Sure, he'll put up a fight, sodium carbonate or something alkaline that can neutralize nitroglycerin. He hasn't really figured out yet, but when the time comes he'll be ready, but he's not going to ruin Katsuki's chance of getting into a hero school. He's not a villain. Hey, Deku, he asked you a question, Kageyama speaks, slapping him across the face. The boy looks at his hand and grimaces, disgusted at the milk that's spilled on it. I think he's gone deaf now. Tsubasa snickers. Or mute. Itami tacks on, nasty voice grating on Izuku's ears. Like a coward. Izuku doesn't respond. He doesn't. He should stand up for himself, defend himself. But it would be over easily if they get bored quickly. So he stays silent. Take some advice from me, Deku. Katsuki finally sighs forcefully, his tone indicating he's sick of messing with Izuku. You're nothing. Just because you know a few dirty tricks doesn't mean shit. You're never going to be a hero without a quirk. But if you want a quirk that badly, then take a swan dive off the roof. Don't finish that sentence. And pray you'll be born with a quirk in your next life. Izuku closes his eyes. The bullies laugh, but Katsuki watches him with hate. They leave and Izuku sits there, curling in on himself. Cowards make the best torturers. Cowards understand fear and they can use it. The manhole cover doesn't give immediately, but with one more desperate push the metal disc flies off clattering against the pavement above and Shinya slithers out, the sludge-like substance of his body spilling in a mess of almost liquid. Immediately his eyes land on someone, a middle schooler, judging by the uniform and stature as the kid turns towards him with frightened eyes, and Shinya feels the telltale pressure of his sludge body splitting into a wide smile. The kid is consumed by shock before something snaps into place and they take off running, but it's too late as Shinya had already hauled himself forward and now consumes the kid whole, his sludge poking for orifices, prying the kid's mouth open forcefully. A medium-sized invisibility cloak, he mutters to himself gleefully, watching as the kid futilely claws at his skin, their fingers sinking through the sludge and grabbing no purchase. "Don't worry," he assures the kid as their wide green eyes turn up at him, "I'm only hijacking your body. It will only be painful for 45 seconds and then," he laughs, drawing out his next words, "it will all be over." Suddenly the kid's hand shoots out and strikes his eye, causing a sharp stinging pain as he cries out. Red-hot anger overcomes him at the kid's audacity, but he can't also rule out his own hubris causing him to shove his face close to the kid in gloating. In response to the strike he tightens his hold on the kid and drowns out their muffled screams. In a few seconds he would be rid of this annoyance and, "Everything is okay now, young man." Shinya spins to the voice, his grip on the kid slackening as he sees the hero silhouetted against the bright light shining in from the other end of the tunnel. "I am here." That's all he can describe it as. Shinya remembers years ago when All Might debuted, when all he did at the time was look up to the hero. If he had still been a kid back then he would have gone into the hero business if it meant following his idol. But alas he had a villainous quirk, one that before finding out he can control other people like puppets while they're unconscious was just an ugly blob of a mutation quirk that turned everyone's nose up at him. His dreams fell down the drain even further when the power got to his head, when he hijacked someone out of wrath and veered off into the path of villainy since then. After, the hero that he used to look up to so much became nothing but a symbol of his own failures, a reminder that he would have to live the rest of his life looking over his shoulder because he made a choice unacceptable by society's standards. The blow is expected but it doesn't hurt any less as the force of the gale sweeps him away, so controlled that Shinya's liquid flesh parts around the kid in his grasp and flies off. Another blow and he's esigi into a small prison, adapting to fit it the way he fills a person's body like water filling an empty container, spreading to all the empty spaces and sinking between their muscles to confine them to his hold. It's a tight fit and he struggles, eyes desperately trying to see through the bottle's clouded surface, peering out as the momentum of it swings around. He's placed somewhere dark, jostled only by the movement from outside. Minutes, or maybe hours pass before he's knocked against roughly and the sensation of falling pulls his stomach into his throat. The sky closes in around him and as he looks down, maneuvering in the bottle, the ground rushes up to meet him. The impact is heavy, painful but not unwelcome as the bottle cap pops off and he's free. Izuku's idol apologizes. He holds off on asking All Might the question burning in his gut, instead plastering on a fake smile and politely bows before leaving, the wind whipping around him on the rooftop. There is steam just barely visible around the seams of the hero's being, joints creaking almost inaudibly. Izuku had averted his eyes as if he was seeing something he shouldn't when the hero turned to go. Izuku looks down at his hand and wishes for the pull that should come from the base of his palm right up to the tips of his fingers like a suction tube just as Mom described it. He longs for the taste of ash in his mouth and fire spilling through his throat and down his tongue. He dreams of sparks flying from his fingers, matching his old friend blow to blow as if he had always been on equal footing. He dreams of lifting a building over his head to save one person as All Might had done, heroic in a way Izuku strives to be, yet cannot for the life of him reach. Midoriya Hisashi once told him, a long time ago over a phone call, one of the years in his early childhood right after he was determined quirkless when his father did not visit him at all, that there was nothing he couldn't do. Quirk or not, you can steal the sky if you ever put your mind to it, my boy. Izuku sighs at that hopeful part of him that still believes his father, as if he hadn't lied on that very last night they were together as a family. Sure, he can steal the sun, the moon, the very stars itself, but right now he can't even reach a cloud, let alone be near enough to the stars to take them for himself. Izuku isn't stupid. He can put up and act all he likes, but he's not getting into any hero school without a quirk. But that doesn't mean he can't try, if only to test his own limits before he eventually drops dead. Izuku walks aimlessly, mind empty and void of thoughts, until he hears screams, the familiar stifling smell of smoke stuffing his nose, ash coating his tongue, and suddenly he's back in the school bathroom, Kaken knocking him against the tiles and screaming in his ears, except this time Kaken's screams are raw and laced with a desperation that Izuku only sees in his own eyes when he's shoved against a mirror, silently asking someone, anyone, for help. Izuku's feet move on its own. The brat, that if-ain't kid with a mop of green hair, he ruined everything. If only he didn't exist, if only Shinya had stumbled upon the blonde one first and not some quirkless useless kid, then maybe he would have gotten away, maybe. The kid's name is Midoriya Izuku. He finds out when he's arrested, police and heroes reprimanding the boy. Shinya sneers at their cowardice, scolding someone who is probably closer to All Might than those Diamond useless heroes ever will be. They're so useless they couldn't even let Shinya get away properly like the cannon fodder they are. The Midoriyas are not a difficult address to find, especially not when you're wearing the skin of a police officer and given free access to a database. He leaves the officer alive, not wanting the offense of having killed law enforcement on his record, especially when he'll be put on the radar even more than he already was after today's disaster, and he follows the instructions to the address, cutting through street corners and slinking between cracks to get there before the Midoriya kid so he can surprise him. The apartment complex comes into view and he bares his teeth as he slips between the cracks to climb up to the specific floor number. Izuku? A voice calls out as he opens the door, and he's even more delighted. A family member, and oh, would he be thrilled to take her body and watch the Midoriya kid suffer as he could do nothing to his own family's body. Or even better yet, he would make Midoriya watch Shinya take this woman's body apart. I made Katsudon just like I promised. Izuku? Shinya pounces on the woman that emerges around the corner, only for a knife to fly into her waiting palm, its blade sinking into his eyes as he couldn't dodge midair. He screams, writhing and cringing away, and he's suddenly reminded of the Midoriya kid clawing at his eyes in defiance. Get out of my house, the woman says, but her voice is shaky. She has the same hair color as Midoriya and he hates her so much. You will pay for this, he hisses and lunges again, this time low and readily parting before the knife can sink into his slime and he engulfs her whole, knife clattering to the ground. She struggles, though not as much as Midoriya Izuku, because by the time Shinya is halfway assimilated in her skin, she's fallen limp. He knows she's still conscious, but there's something unsettling about the way she gives up, unwilling to fight any longer. He holds on tighter, as if she's holding a trump card and only doing this to get him to let his guard down. He doesn't kill her. Maybe he'll make Midoriya kill her. At the thought, he giggles, the woman's voice turned deeper from his inflection. He sits down and waits. Midoriya Izuku returns with an audible click of the door closing. Izuku? Shinya asks in the same tone the woman used when he had entered. I'm home, Midoriya replies, and Shinya can't help the flutter in his heart at the thought of tormenting this boy. Midoriya steps into the kitchen, placing his school bag on a table and glancing at the woman Shinya is wearing before looking back in a double take. Mom? Is something wrong? He asks, and Shinya frowns behind the woman's smile. Had he done something wrong? What gave it away? Oh, it's nothing much, I'll tell you about it over dinner, Shinya replies with a light laugh. Midoriya watches his mother, his face expressionless. Shinya is starting to get worried, sweat gathering in the woman's palm. Midoriya breaks the tension with a smile and says, You were starting to worry me. Whatever for? Midoriya smiles sweetly, picking his school bag back up again. I'll tell you over dinner. Midoriya shuffles awkwardly before he goes and Shinya raises a brow. The boy doesn't say anything, but Shinya waits patiently. After all, that's what mothers do, don't they? Can you hug me? Midoriya finally says. The woman's right hand comes up to cover Shinya's devious smile. How would the kid react, knowing that the last time he hugged his mom won't actually be his mom? That he would have to die knowing he never properly got to say goodbye to his mother? Of course, Shinya answers, his smile melting into a sweet one as he opens the woman's arms. Midoriya comes and he's just slightly shorter than his mom, not fully grown yet. Shinya sees his breath fan the unruly curls on top of the kid's head, blowing rhythmically until Midoriya pulls away, his face shadowed by the green mop. I'll come to dinner in an hour maybe. I think your favorite show is on today. Shinya watches the kid go, flopping onto the sofa in front of the television. 15 minutes and he's bored, irritated, and agitated. 30 minutes and he sits up, clicking off the show and heading towards the rooms in the narrow hallway. He sneaks, slowly turning the knob on the first door and frowning when it doesn't open. He takes the next door. It doesn't open. The last one opens into a bathroom and he feels a bout of dizziness take him. He stumbles back. 40 minutes and Shinya is yanking at the front door that doesn't open, screeching in frustration as a pounding headache tenses around his temple. He feels trapped, claustrophobic in a way he's never felt inside a human body before. A thought pops up in his head that he can easily discard the body and leave through the cracks, but then everything would be for naught. 50 minutes he stumbles into the kitchen for water, eyes zoning onto the gas stove, fire burning under nothing. Sheet, he says in his own voice before lunging to turn it off. He's miscalculated however as he dives onto the floor instead, legs weak and trembling. He turns it off. 1 hour passes by and Shinya is on the floor, sludge struggling against the heavy cloak of skin. Out of the corner of his eyes he sees a foot step into view and before he knows it, he's sat upright in front of verdant green eyes. Who are you? Shinya rasps out, Midoriya? Izukuyu Efeng Beach. Midoriya is staring at him with troubled eyes and his lips pressed in a tight line. The sludge villain. In a moment of adrenaline and rage and indignity, Shinya jumps forward and grapples for hold. Midoriya shoots backwards and they both roll onto the ground, clawing and scratching for purchase, for something to hurt the other with. Shinya is weakened but his quirk is a different kind of breed, one that molds the person he's wearing into something incredible. Shinya is still stronger than the boy. Is what he thought, but Midoriya, through their brutal scrap, somehow manages to end up on top, 2 thumbs pressed on the woman's trachea, eyes shattered as he looks down at his mother. Shinya chokes. The woman's short nails sinking into the boy's skin and dragging lines of red down his arm. Midoriya cries out, a wretched raw sound like the tail end of a fraught scream, and Shinya has to blink as tears fall into his eyes, blinding him. Shinya senses the weakness and is convinced he can win this fight, but a knee presses into the woman's stomach and he feels pressure all around him, choking him and pulling him into a tight embrace. One slight of solace gives him relief. The fingers on the woman's throat relaxes a tad bit and Shinya hauls his sludge body out the woman's mouth. Straight into a container. Some men are too dull to feel what might happen. Others torture themselves with maybes and populate their dreams, with horrors more terrible than their worst enemy could inflict upon them. Midoriya Izuku is strong. He's not strong the way Katsuki is, who could always be seen training his muscles and strength at the playground they used to go to as kids. Izuku would pass him, watching in awe as Katsuki lifted himself onto the monkey bars and slowly lowered his body down. Sometimes, if Izuku came later, he would be able to catch Katsuki with his arms out, bracing them for the force of the controlled explosions. Neither is he strong like Dabi, who confessed that for the first few years they knew each other that he had been in so much pain, his wounds festering with infections and the phantom memory of his skin melting off his bones. No amount of bandages or salves can soothe the pain, and the only reason he could survive was by the kindness of a stranger and through the strength of his own will. No, Izuku is strong in that he could hold his own mom down with both thumbs cutting off her airflow and not feel the guilt shattering him into a million pieces. And maybe it did, but Midoriya Izuku is notoriously good at holding himself together, whatever is left of his resolve acting as glue piecing together the cracks in his mind. He slumps back and slams a Tupperware container with the sludge villain inside shut. His mind slips into sleep as the rest of his body pulls himself up and moves on autopilot, He opens the windows, checks his mom's breathing, and he vaguely recalls calling for an ambulance before he had confronted the villain. Izuku looks back down at the container in his hands, numbness spreading from his butter fingers. "Please don't turn me in," the villain whispers through the box, trembling. "This isn't just breaking the law, mister." Izuku's voice is coming out of his mouth, but he feels detached from his own skin. "You heard us. Why you're going to get revenge, aren't you?" Izuku watches the villain. Revenge? His mother was hurt and is possibly dying. The villain hunted him down and broke into his house, and Izuku's mind is jumbled, a mess of thoughts and plans. He breathes in, holding the Tupperware box to his chest as a gesture of comfort even when it shouldn't be with the villain in the box. The clock slows, the second hand ticks to a standstill. From the nature of his crime and the terrifying potential of his quirk, the sludge villain would be sent to Tartarus, no questions asked. This villain could one day wear the Prime Minister's skin, or someone in the Hero Commission, and walk into their office without suspicion. The things he could do is endless. But Izuku isn't going to sentence someone to a life in Tartarus, because that's what it was, a life sentence. You could not go into that place expecting to one day live out a sentence or be sent out on parole. No, the truly dangerous were sent there with no intention to rehabilitate. Gears turn, whirring with the ferocity and urgency of a steam engine. The intricate workings of a clock, the shifting of a bike gear onto smooth ones, the frantic running of a man out of breath. Izuku thinks and thinks and thinks, and he takes a deep breath. The clock accelerates until it ticks by each second, and eventually the minute hand shudders forward. Izuku makes a decision. He is never going to get into UA without a quirk. Sure, he could be a hero with support items and such, but every hero school was built on the pre-existing prejudice against the quirkless. It is never going to risk a backlash from the public for letting a defenseless student that could not only injure themselves but put the people they are supposed to be protecting into danger. He couldn't inspire people like All Might, nor clear the debris off a rescue op like 13, nor could he bare his teeth like Gang Orca and lower the crime rates in his city from the sheer terror of the villains there. He can't keep a lonely person company like Present Mike, nor apprehend a dangerous villain like Miruko could, nor does he have the resources to help the people suffering under the system like Ingenium does. Midoriya Izuku was just a boy with no power. He's already decided in that split second of a moment, rushing to prepare. He packs up his clothes, the bare essentials plus his favorite Gang Orca hoodie, and throws in what he needs. He stashed pocket money collected over the years under a floorboard and carefully peels it back to grab other valuables a 12-year-old might have as well. At the top he lays down the Tupperware container and zips his yellow backpack up, donning a mask and a blue Sirius cap, complete with pulling a matching Wild Wild Pussycats hoodie over the cap. Both pieces of merch were inconspicuous enough in design to be plain, and Izuku knows dressing like this can catch more attention than not, but where he's going people wouldn't look twice at someone suspicious trying to keep their identity hidden. Izuku stops at the kitchen, looking away from his mom. He's not going to think about it, not going to allow himself a moment of reprieve, lest he breaks down from it and slows his escape. Izuku is going to run away. Well, at least that's what it will look like. I'm sorry for doing this to you. I'm going to run away. I'll be safe. It's nothing you did. I was planning on it for a long time. I won't tell you my reasons, but I just ask you to tell Dad not to worry too much. A note that, to any other eye, would look like he legitimately ran away and his mother just happened to get attacked on the day. Except for one tiny detail, the two of them had always called his dad by Hisashi. With just that, Izuku trusts his mother and her intellect enough to be able to figure out the circumstances when she wakes up. If she wakes up, Izuku's throat closes up and he squeezes his eyes shut. Don't think about it, don't think about it, don't. He hears the ambulance. Tears in his eyes, Izuku vaults from the window, but not before crushing the landline under his foot. Izuku runs. His mind tells him he's making himself suspicious, but his heart burns with sorrow and regret tears through his lungs. He doesn't know where he's going, but he's painfully aware of the pavement slamming into the soles of his shoes, the blood pounding through his ears, sweat matting and drying in his hair, the Tupperware rattling hazardously in his bag, and the cooling September night's wind biting against him, pulling him back as if deterring him from his decisions. He stops, taking in a gulp of air like a man dying. He's at a bridge, cars whirring past behind him, its lights making streaks of red behind his tear-blurred vision. A step forward, he doesn't know what he's doing, and he's looking over the river, setting sun sinking underwater. Hey, a muffled voice comes from behind. If you're gonna jump, can you at least let me go? I'm kinda denser than water. Izuku freezes. Take a swan dive, he screams. His throat is raw and his head is pounding, and somewhere deep inside him, he hurts. He screams and screams and screams, falling to his knees as tears run down his cheeks, dripping onto the dry pavement below. He screams a painful, bellowing cry of anger, or was it hate or sorrow or the culmination of everything he's ever been through from the first moment his doctor told him he was quirkless to the last, where everyone who he's ever loved and cared for left him alone in this world. Sharp pain shoots up his fingers, but Izuku doesn't stop clawing at the ground, grabbing and tearing as if he can take the world apart and rip reality from its very seams so he can, for once in his life, be completely and purely happy, without his restless mind running miles per hour, without the lurking knowledge that he's nothing more than a pathetic quirkless boy, without the painful reminder that every time his mother looks at him she sees someone who left her. So Izuku screams and cries and grabs the world with his bare hands and yells at himself to get the F up. Izuku chokes, spittle flying as he's cut off by his own breathlessness. His fingers are scraped, nails hanging off on the ones where he scratched at the rough pavement, and he can feel the deep scratch wounds stinging under the night's frigid air, prodding him to pull the hoodie's sleeves further over his arms. He lets out another cough, wincing at the soreness in his throat. Struggling, he stands up, and instantly gets hit by a wave of vertigo, his head pounding against his skull. Maybe that wasn't the brightest idea to scream at the top of his lungs. You okay, kid? Izuku blinks wearily, then swings his bag from his shoulders to dig around for the Tupperware tightly sealed. There. Hello, Sludge, Izuku says amicable, his bones weighing like lead in the exhaustion of his long day. Oh geez, you're a terrifying kid. Izuku can't manage a laugh, so he just smiles, the box held in two hands gingerly. Probably best not to tell your captor that. A moment of silence. Then, bluntly, are you going to kill me? Izuku's smile slides off his face. Rage and vengeance and despair, whatever it is, his gut is stirring in a whirlwind of red-hot emotions, and he's only trying his best to suppress it. I hate you, Sludge-san, Izuku replies just as bluntly. But I'm not going to kill you. Then what are you going to do to me? You didn't hand me in, you ran away, what the F do you want with me? While thinking up an answer, Izuku looks around. He'd better make his way off the bridge before a pro-hero arrives to investigate the noise. Walking down a path aimlessly, Izuku speaks, I'm going to save you, Sludge-san. Huh. He looks down. The death penalty was abolished a few centuries ago, but with a quirk like yours, you're going to Tartarus, I think. The sludge isn't moving in the container, but Izuku wagers that he's stewing on those realizations. Why did you do that to me? Izuku asks honestly. Why my mother? The sludge villain stays silent, and Izuku brings the box up against his forehead, breathing out in tandem with the action. He scoffs without ire as he whispers to the sludge, You're not a good person, Sludge. The beat. I know. They walk in tense silence. The sludge speaks up, I'm Fukamatsu Shinya. Midoriya Izuku. I'll be in your care. The streets are scattered with the few people milling about, most of them at home hiding from the darkness. Midoriya, I'm sorry. A gale of wind blows through the city. I don't forgive you, Fukamatsu-san. Izuku doesn't think. He's scared of what he'll find in his mind. I don't deserve it anyway, kid. I'm sorry. Midoriya Izuku's mind is a mess. Not only that, it's working in overdrive to compartmentalize the events of the day, working through exhaustion bit by bit. Feelings are vaulted, kept for later puzzling out, and memories are divided behind a window pane, rendering it something that Izuku has seen but not experienced firsthand, like a piece of evidence he can later examine with emotional detachment for a more logical outcome. The stolen body of his mother choking under his thumb, the fresh pain from suffocating with the sludge villain in his lungs, and the jarring experience of watching his hero deflate with proof of what heroics can do to even the strongest person. Izuku watches all of that from behind the glass with an impassive response. He ambles until his stomach growls and he pushes into a familiar ramen shop. The heat greets him and the cold melts from his bones immediately, comfort draped over him. It's been barely a few seconds, but he pulls off his hoodie, already sweating buckets as he places Fukamatsu back in his backpack. Midoriya-kun. Izuku's heart drops and he whirls on the sound. He's been caught, whole body tensed and prepared for action. Instead, he sees a girl and he squints, trying to place her familiar face. His eyes widen. Takchan? Tachibana Yuki, his mind supplies, but with a much narrower face and softer shape. Izuku finds his lips splitting into a wide grin of joy. Aizawa Shoyuta sees the hunting hero hound dog trotting off the bridge. It seems that every hero in the vicinity had heard the scream coming from there earlier. Inui Ryo spots him at the same time and gives a nod as much as his animal head could. He gestures towards the bridge and turns back towards it, beckoning for Shoyuta to follow. What is it? It is the start of his patrol, but the scream had bled away any trace of exhaustion and had him rushing towards the source. Inui informs him he's already contacted the local police department to investigate and shows him a spot on the floor. Shoyuta kneels over it, squinting under the lights above the bridge. Spatters of blood, but no other traces of crime. Can you track it? Shoyuta asks, to which Inui confirms he can. The hunting hero leaves him to the crime scene, off to chase the trail before it fades out. Shoyuta has come across scenes like this before, someone putting up a struggle while being kidnapped, a mugging, or even a scene of SXL assault. It's the tragic reality, so Shuta's always tried to detach himself from the victims if only to maintain a logical outlook as a whole, and also to stop himself from sending the perpetrator to an early grave. That's why it will be a long time before Shoyuta even thinks much of this moment. He will hand it off to police and never think about it until he's called to join the investigation. It will be a long time until his life collides with the unstoppable force that is Midoriya Izuku. People need stories, child. They bring us hope, and that hope is real. If that's the case, what does it matter whether people in them actually lived? Make yourself comfortable. Tachibana lays down a towel over the back of the couch, beckoning for Izuku to sit. As soon as he does, facing the open window of Tachibana's small apartment, he can feel thin fingers parting his hair this way and that. Have you settled on a color? Izuku hums, I'm thinking of just getting it bleached, then chalked. Chalk won't last too long though. It won't last long, but that's a good thing for Izuku, whose plans require no one to remember his face. It means I can change my hair color regularly. Thankfully, Tachibana doesn't ask questions that are too personal, but playfully says, "Oh, you're really trying to confuse people, aren't you? I prefer we call it tactical design." Thank you very much, Izuku huffs with a smile. There's silence as Tachibana gets to work, an expert thanks to her own dye job that colors her previously brown hair a bright orange. A beat and she asks, "Are you all right, Midoriya?" Izuku opens his mouth but no words come out as he processes the question and its implications. Yeah, he says as convincingly as he can, because he is fine, despite the events of the past few days, because his mind is advanced and he can't maintain the pride of his intelligence if he's going to be not fine because of a few distressing moments. I'm fine. Dyeing my hair just reminds me of someone. A friend. Why didn't you dye it with them? Tachibana asks, leaning over to get a look at his face. Izuku's mouth opens again in an O shape. Ah, he says simply. Maybe I could have. It's a lie because he doesn't know if Dabi will be there when he gets to the beach, and he doesn't know if he will be able to take the fact that his friend isn't there in his time of need. It's a selfish thought because there's no way Dabi could have known he was in trouble, but he's a kid, and he thinks he should be allowed to be selfish for once. He reprimands himself for that childish train of thought. To fill in the silence, Tachibana asks, "How old are you now?" 12. Why? She sniffs, "You don't speak like a 12-year-old. Izuku gasps in mock horror, "I do. Have you ever heard a 12-year-old talk about dyeing hair? Then how would you know what we sound like?" He's slipping, he knows that, but the smile and laugh that brought on Tachibana's face is enough for Izuku to relax into his mask. "Now you sound like one," she grins, teeth sharp but friendly, not knowing how much of a reassurance that is to him. almost like I am one. She mimes pinching his cheeks, hands gloved and speckled with dye. Don't you cheek with me, you little brat, because I have the fate of your hair in my hands. What are you gonna do, make my hair fall out? Duh. Takchan. Tachibana bursts into laughter and Izuku lets out a cry of annoyance, flailing his arms. A joke? Ow. Izuku hits her arm lightly. It was a joke. This precious hair of mine. He wanted to show Izuku his new piercing, another ring on his helix. It's an act of defiance, something Endeavor would have hated, and while Dabi doesn't live under him, doesn't need to be afraid anymore, he still needs that reassurance that he is different, that he is his own, that he isn't his creation. He's free, but sometimes he feels his father's hold on him too tightly. Dabi is starting to get worried. Not only has it been weeks since he's seen Izuku, but also because usually if the younger boy was nowhere to be seen at Dagoba Beach, traces of him can usually be found around there, tinkering on thrown-away hero support items, building computers, and all its parts of it shoved away into a half-buried car. No, Dabi has seen the news of the villain attack, so he opts to go to Izuku's school. Despite how much he despises Todoroki Tuya, he doesn't suppress the nagging fear that something has happened to Izuku, a brotherly instinct that's long since lain dormant when he died for the first time. He doesn't wait outside, not wanting to be arrested for loitering or be recorded as a suspicious man lurking outside and waiting for children. He doesn't see Izuku. Midoriya from school. Dabi's attention zones into that conversation, catching the tail end of a bout of laughter. They leave in a group, one of them, blonde and angry and a very familiar description that has Dabi burning inside, walks ahead of the group and the others follow behind in their own conversation. Hey Bakugo, do you think he'd actually offed himself? There was mirth in those words and Dabi stiffens. The question was directed towards the boy at the front, but he doesn't respond. I didn't think he would last this long, to be honest. Ha, really? I thought he'd last longer. Maybe, but he definitely wasn't gonna make it to high school. Bakugo spins around and yells, shut the F up. Even Dabi flinches at that, but he has to keep moving past the frozen group to avoid getting caught for following them. It's lucky for him too because the boy stalks off in a random direction without looking back, which allows Dabi to slink in between the alleyways and follow him under the guise of shadows. And corner him. Maybe it was the boy's yet to recede anger, or maybe Bakugo was just unaware of his surroundings, but he's so blinded he doesn't even notice when he walks into a narrow street with no one else around except for Dabi. Bakugo stops dead in his tracks as if realizing at that moment. He spins around but Dabi is faster and slams Bakugo against the wall, holding his face. Bakugo tries to strike out, but Dabi sends heat into his fingertips and he grimaces under Dabi's hand. The threat is clear enough, though he doesn't tell Bakugo that if he set his hand on fire it would hurt Dabi as much as it hurt him, maybe not that much considering the dead tissue lining his arms, but Bakugo never has to know Dabi's fatal quirk. Slowly, one heated hand still wrapped around Bakugo's throat, Dabi retracts the other hand covering his mouth and says, let's talk. Bakugo spits in face, but Dabi only scrunches his nose in disgust. He barely feels the wet where it landed on his dead skin. F off. Bakugo responds simply, pushing his head back against the wall as if it would swallow him and bring him as far from Dabi's deadly hands as possible. His mannerisms and speech, the way he holds his chin high, it's like Izuku's tales and descriptions come to life, prancing like fiction made real. It irks him. Let's talk about Midoriya Izuku. Bakugo stares, and Dabi fears for a moment that the boy would snarl and deny any connection to Izuku. However, Bakugo lurches forward, grabbing Dabi's arms faster than the eye could see, and despite all that he's trained for, Dabi is a much weaker fighter than anyone he's known, if he couldn't rely on his quirk, so he easily flips onto the pavement. But Dabi didn't get this far in life being honest, so he lies still as Bakugo, instead of running and calling for help, has him pinned down roughly with both palms sparking dangerously against his shoulders. What the F did you do to him? Bakugo demands, spittle flying. Whoa, slow down there, Dabi says nonchalantly as if panic isn't slowly creeping up his throat. What happened to Izuku? He continues to act the villain just to coax something out from the boy. What gives you the impression I did anything to him? Don't if he lied to me, where did you take him? Dabi doesn't respond immediately, a trick he's picked up from Izuku to let the other person keep talking to fill in the space of silence. It works as Bakugo growls, though not without punching him across the face, an act which has Dabi reeling and blinking away stars from his vision. Did you kill him? Dabi blinks, rewinding, wait what? Don't act dumb. There's nothing you could have wanted from that quirkless Deku. You're just trying to hide the body, aren't you? In a moment of weakness, Bakugo's grip falters and Dabi throws him off. They scramble around each other, but Bakugo's stronger than him and Dabi grits his teeth before igniting the world in blue flames. Bakugo falls down in between them. What happened? Like I'd tell you. Dabi kicks the boy, ignoring the undignified yell that follows as he presses the tip of his shoes down on both of the boy's wrists, an unveiled threat. Izuku mumbles when he's not consciously trying to restrain himself or hide himself behind a mask, and Dabi listens when Izuku talks about people's strengths and weaknesses and how to permanently incapacitate them. It's no different with Kaken. What happened to him? Bakugo studies him through poorly disguised fear, sweat dripping down his face from the overwhelming heat. But despite the visible threat that Dabi poses and the flames hot enough to cremate Bakugo and make sure his body is never discovered, the boy still musters up courage to not answer Dabi's question. What do you want with him? His body's not made for a fire quirk, but he has to keep this up for a little longer. He tones down the fire to a degree, not enough to burn him from the inside but enough to keep Bakugo down. Dabi answers, I've been a long-time friend of his and I haven't heard from him in a long time. Bakugo stares at him, trying to find any traces of a lie. He scoffs, just like the cops to cover up their blunder. Dabi raises a brow and Bakugo speaks. He talks about the sludge villain, about Midoriya Inko and her comatose condition in the hospital, about the police that came to Bakugo's house to interrogate him, but were paid off not to investigate anything at school. There's bitterness in his voice and Dabi swears he detects a hint of regret in the crack of his voice, but he hasn't had to be this aware of others' slight change in emotion since the difference in the mood of a person could mean a life or death situation. That Deku left a note, said he was gonna run away. Dabi frowns. If he did run away, wouldn't Izuku come find Dabi first? They were that close, right? But that beach might be useless, and I can believe he'd do cowardly things. You're on thin Fang ice, bud, Dabi warns. I couldn't believe, don't believe, and would never believe that beach would leave Auntie Inko alone like that. He might be a beach, but he's not selfish. Dabi eases his feet off of Bakugo's wrists and the boy scrambles away, rubbing his arms. Dabi holds out a hand in Bakugo's direction to keep him from doing what his eyes seem to be hinting at, an attack. Even when beaten down, the boy wants to jump at him and blow his face off. The smoke coming off his hand burns through his throat, but Dabi has had significantly more years with soot drowning his lungs out, so he's confident he can outlast Bakugo. Leave, Dabi says, threatening. He feels wetness on his cheeks, though it isn't tears. You're a coward hiding behind your quirk? Bakugo spits back. Dabi shoots back. And you're saying you don't do the same? Bakugo freezes up, his muscles visibly locking. Dabi takes that as a sign he's going to attack and throws up a screen of fire. He's already given off too much smoke, and if he stays any longer pro-heroes are going to show up, so he takes that as a sign he should be leaving as well, hands coming up to wipe at the blood dripping from his peeling skin. The fire dissipates behind him, but he's already out of sight, leaving Bakugo standing alone in a ring of ash. Midoriya Izuku has more resolve than his small vessel can handle, but that only means he has to grow bigger for it. Right then, anger and determination bursting at the seams, Izuku jumps off of the first floor fire exit onto the back of an unsuspecting villain. The momentum carries both of them over and the villain, arms windmilling and a snatched purse flying out of their hands, smashes face first into the concrete. Izuku winces in sympathy behind his mask, but twists the villain's arms behind their back the way he's seen pro-heroes on the screen do it 100 times. The victim who got their purse stolen runs up to him, out of breath and breathing furiously. Thank you, she wheezes, the victim to the most cliché exposition scenario of all time. This beach sure can run. Izuku smiles even though she can't see it anyways. I've notified the police so they should be here in a second. The woman blinks. How old are you? Facebook. He covers it up by shooting up into a standing position and bows in a carefully crafted persona. "Don't worry, miss, I get that a lot." He doesn't answer the question and climbs back up the fire exit. He had called the police the moment the robbery took place, all the while following the villain through back alley ends and estimating his pathing to lay a trap, a successful one at that, so he should still be worrying about getting caught as a vigilante despite his lack of a quirk. He salutes the woman in a show, then disappears into the building at the sound of a siren. As he makes his way to the exit of the building on the other side, he ruffles his head of curls, bleached with the help of Tacchon and further sprayed a temporary pink to disguise his very noticeable brand of dark green turned black. He pulls his mask down and flips his Gangorka hoodie inside out. It was limited edition and hasn't been sold in a long time, so Izuku's going to gamble on the fact that most policemen checking the CCTV outside the building wouldn't be able to match the black with white accents to the white with black accents he switched over to. Pulling the hoodie over his head and shouldering through the door, Izuku wpis out a burner phone and pretends to hold it up for a selfie, carrying an annoyed expression towards the disturbance in the alleyway over. After all, he's just a resident who's sharing with his social media friends that he's going out and has no idea there was a robbery where the 1 or 2 cops rushed past him without a second glance. Act like you belong and no one would notice that you don't. Izuku hums and fades away. It doesn't always turn out this smooth, especially when he first started to fight crime on his own and just skirted the edges of law. The first criminal he tried to fight was a spectacular failure. There's not much a skinny 12-year-old kid with no live combat experience could do against a much larger, much heavier criminal. He had set the sludge, Fukamatsu, down along with his belongings when he first went out in search of people to help, not trusting the villain to not escape and wreak havoc on the world once again. Izuku might be forgiving, he might seem naive, but he's not trusting enough to let the man who tried to kill him go free yet. It would require a lot of work, but Izuku has always been a hard worker. So what's one more burden? The first crime Izuku stumbled upon left him feeling sick. A woman cornered, the larger man grabbing her with ill intentions and a lascivious hand on his belt. Izuku, with his black surgical mask over his face, had panicked. Patrolling the neighborhood was one thing, walking around and feeling like a real hero out at night. But face to face with horrible danger, Izuku didn't know what to do with his hands. He acted brave in front of Tachibana and was confident with his newly colored hair that he could hide behind anonymity. Instead, he shouted, "Police! The perpetrator is here!" There was no police nor hero in the vicinity, and it wouldn't be difficult for the criminal to check that. However, the distraction served its purpose. The woman, tears of shame and fear and rage issuing down her face, kicked out, striking the man in his most sensitive spot, and took that moment to duck under his arms. The man screamed in indignity and the woman tripped. Thankfully, Izuku had regained his wits by then and caught her before she hit the ground, pulling her up in a rush of adrenaline and shoving her into the street. Without a look back, she scrambled away and shot down the road. Izuku ran in her direction, but was yanked back by his collar and he crashed into the wall. Undignified. "You effing brat," the criminal hissed, hands grabbing Izuku by the collar and dragging him upright against the bricks. "Let you be reminded that Midoriya Izuku's birthday passed not long ago and he should be studying on a school night instead of being out fighting crime. Let you be reminded that Midoriya Izuku was 12 at the time, not anywhere near his full height yet and still waiting to grow up. Let you be reminded that Midoriya Izuku is not, invincible." Izuku grappled. He couldn't see through his tears, but he was reaching out, raking claws of sharp nails now the criminal's arm. A painful grip yanked his hand away and Izuku thought he was dying, choking as his legs kicked in futility. This wasn't like the time he fell out of a tree. This wasn't like the time Dabi stood behind Kaken with a vicious grin. This wasn't like the sharp clarity that tore through his mind with a vengeance when he saw a wrong smile on his mother's face, nor the snippets of confusion and calculation behind his mother's eyes when Izuku prompted her with lies, nor when he hugged her and sighed in relief when he felt her breath against his hair, her heartbeat against his chest. This wasn't the slowing of time around him, a train accelerating in between the still Polaroid of the world. No, this was brutal, Izuku's barest instincts overtaking him and adrenaline pumping as hard as ever. Izuku's mind went blank as he threw his kicking legs around the man's arm, the effort held by the core strength he trained in imitation of Kaken, and grabbed the man's arm with Izuku's other hand. In one desperate motion Izuku snapped them the wrong way and the man dropped him, screaming. Izuku's victory was short-lived because not long after, he felt a vicious kick into his gut, air escaping his lungs and left him gasping, gulping for oxygen once again, his lungs winded pathetically. Another kick came, knocking Izuku's head bouncing against the wall behind him and back on the floor. His world was red and filled with pain even with adrenaline and Izuku couldn't see. In the present, Izuku's hand comes up to his nose reflexively, wincing at the thought of the blood in his nose and the broken face he sported for the better part of a month. He makes his way past Tachibana's apartment complex and heads down a tunnel. The tunnel has been abandoned for years by the city, but it's been repopulated since then with empty sleeping bags and crumpled tents that would occasionally house a sleeping person. The homeless wave at Izuku as he walks by, already settled into familiarity in the past month. He stayed there and became one of them. Deku-kun, an old woman calls for him and Izuku skips over without responding, smiling bright as he helps her push her trolley over a speed bump. She pats him once and Izuku gives a small bow, one less graceful than the showman's bow he gave people in his vigilante persona, but one that leans into the old woman's touch, before heading over to his own little spot and plopping down his backpack to stretch out the cranks in his body. A little boy comes up to him and before he can register anything, he places a strip of beef jerky in Izuku's palm and runs away. The mother waves from the other side of the tunnel as the boy runs back into her arms, her haggard face kind despite her circumstances. If I knew all you had to do was be a cute boy, I would have kept a stolen skin suit a long time ago, Fukamatsu grumbles from where he sits in the box. That's unethical, Izuku says, tearing the jerky in two and slipping half of it into Fukamatsu's box. Since when have you cared about what's ethical? Izuku gives the box a pointed stare. There's a difference between unethical and illegal. It's true that Izuku doesn't care much for the laws. Sure, there's the overbearing presence of authority over him, ingrained from living in a society that's not something he can easily get rid of. But Izuku's father is Midoriya Hisashi, and Izuku remembers his childhood lessons well, took note of the disdain on Hisashi's face during movie night, and the moments Inko comes home frustrated at the news channel. Izuku once watched Dabi retching through a sob, whole body freshly bandaged from who knows where and trembling with pain. When he offered to take him to a hospital, his Aniki, strong and sarcastic and unshakable save for when Takami taunts him, Dabi looked at him with fear and Izuku was left to fill in the blanks. Takami Kigo, hawks now, gliding above the city with a star's dashing grin. Izuku still couldn't figure out what happened to him, where he went. At the time, 9 years old and heartbroken, he couldn't for the life of him figure out why anyone would actively choose not to go to UA, and he thought that maybe Takami's guardians forced him to move. Guardians, a word which can mean anything from a protector, someone who looks over you and cares for you, to a legal parent, the person who makes decisions for you when you're not old enough to make them for yourself. Anything from an orphanage, a relative, to the very government itself. So laws don't have much hold on Izuku. The basic ones that align with his moral code are honored. Traffic laws uphold the politeness between strangers and the taking of one's life is, of course, cruel. Ethics on the other hand is his own, an unwavering compass pointing to his heart. Fukamatsu scoffs. Who are you to play judge, jury, and executioner? Izuku freezes for a moment, then laughs back. Slow down there, I might start to think you have a moral compass. I do. Somewhat. Izuku hums as he swallows the last of the jerky. I'm planning on doing something. You always are and I never know what it is. For that I need money, Izuku muses with a hand on his chin, leaning back on his other arm. You need money for everything, kid. While your commentary is appreciated, Fukamatsu-san, you're not saying anything of substance lately. Actually, where did you get all the money that's been supporting us? You know, if you actually leave money alone for a bit, it starts to perform mitosis. What the F does that mean? Mito-ses, Izuku sounds out. Yoshibanretsu. You, from ownership, sure, like in yarn, and bunretsu, from division. Yeah, why the F? Do you think I would know kanji? After explaining the concept of mitosis and cell division to Fukamatsu, Izuku stands up and declares he's going to prepare for his plan. He spares a smile for himself as he observes the sludge's confusion. Wait, what does mitosis have to do with money? See you later, Fukamatsu. Sometimes Izuku doesn't feel guilt hand in hand with his happiness. The tunnel leads further in and opens up into a closed-off railway, stone dripping with dew and rot, rats scuttling under moss and overgrowth. Izuku fetches a steel bar off the ground, hefting it in his grip before swinging it wildly in a test. The sudden weight pulls him forward and Izuku stumbles along with the momentum, almost too late to catch himself from falling face first into the ground. He bristles, throwing the bar away as he continues down the tracks. He picks up this and that, wood planks and concrete screws, weapons he then uses to swing around before throwing them away, dissatisfied. He picks up another unsatisfactory makeshift weapon and he's reached his destination. An opening of light off to the side of the tracks, an elevated platform of empty space, an abandoned station. Izuku guesses its destination, a barren part of Mizudafu, wiped clean from a villain attack a few years ago save for the few stragglers and squatters who chance it in the shelter of the dangerously fragile buildings. He climbs up the platform and surveys it, a plan he's been mulling over for the past few weeks laid out like a blueprint in front of him. He arrived at the tunnel 5 months earlier when he left Tachibana, filled with determination yet too little time, too little money. There wasn't much he could actually do, a quirkless runaway kid, but he's nothing if not stubborn, and so his crazy plans were born, hinged only on hope and speculation. He can't do much that the local authorities haven't already tried, but he has ideas that they won't bother to try either. Here he is known by the simple alias, Deku, that will definitely ring a bell for anyone that knew him from before, but the people who've only seen glimpses of a green-haired boy called Midoriya Izuku on the posters won't recognize him now. They'll see the friendly vigilante Deku with bleached white hair that's regularly spray-dyed or chalked like a delinquent. That should be enough for him to make something new with his own power. He taps a steel bar against the tiles of the station and the sound echoes throughout. He's so lost in thought he almost doesn't hear another echo of another sound, almost, because his head snaps in the direction it came from, stance dropped low. Many hand-to-hand combat heroes do this, and Dabi even told him to keep his center of gravity low. After the action, however, he silently reprimands himself for doing that instead of hiding because the station is big and empty and whoever's on the other side of it isn't going to be countered by a close combat stance. It's always like this instinct he's honed into himself after hours and days of committing those moves to memory, doing them step by step from YouTube video instructions and what little he can remember of Dabi's training, versus the reason he's been living with for a decade, an overheated brain picking himself apart as much as he picks apart his opponents. He doesn't drop back into the tracks behind the platform, instead dashing for a pillar that should hide him from whoever made the noise. As he presses himself against the pillar, his eyes run along the benches in front of him, rimmed with metal that just so slightly reflects what's behind him. He sees a figure and he holds his breath. Who's there? The voice is everywhere, echoing through the station, through his bones. There is silence and Izuku watches as the figure in the blurry reflection shifts and footsteps echo in time with those movements. There is a speck of rust on the metal railings, he notices as he stares at it intently, a stone in the pit of his stomach. I thought you said this place was empty? Another voice speaks up. Izuku doesn't see a second figure. It should be, the first voice hums. This I'm leaving. Are they criminals doing something shady, he wonders. The stone is heavier and he feels like he's falling in a dream, though it's much more solid, more real. Can I borrow it though? The beat. The sigh. Yes. There's a shuffling noise and the rapid sound of footsteps, likely the second person running away, leaving one person left. Oh this, the person says, an impish glee in their voice, this will be fun. There is a ping noise of metal and mechanics. A shotgun reload. Izuku belatedly realizes just as he realizes the stone resting in his gut is fear. Let the hunt begin. The duck walked up to the lemonade stand and he said to the man running the stand, Hey, you got any grapes? They call her Hound if only for her ability to smell fear. Her Biartich name doesn't matter, not when she's much better off without it. It's the name of a girl who hears and feels too much, her quirk taking her eyes as the price for heightened senses. The girl who became pathetic when she lost the crutch of sight at age 4 and wallowed in self-pity for all of adolescence. No, Hound isn't weak, she's the apex predator of the underground, and people no longer define her by her blindness, but rather her thirst for blood. So when she stakes out a hidden place where she can run and supervise deals without the risk of an intruder, she's mildly surprised when she hears the ringing sound of metal from further into the underground station. Her head snaps in the direction of the disturbance, and she feels the movement of air as the people she's hired to mediate, only if things go wrong of course, also turn to look in that direction. They wouldn't have heard it of course, but she rarely snaps to attention that sharply lest there was danger. What's going on? Hound hums but doesn't turn to face the asker when she says, just a little rat. Yeah right, another says, a boss of this and that who deals in this and that. Not her job to remember what goes on in the Farlands' politics. We're leaving. Wait. Hound ignores them, the ripples in the air indicating the arising conflict. There's the familiar smell of fear. As they start to make their way out up the stairs, not wanting to be caught in the death trap that is an enclosed space underground, Hound also makes her way, but in the opposite direction. The fear fades slightly and she makes her way through the disabled barriers. Someone follows her, but the liltingly familiar footsteps reassures her and she doesn't turn back to check if this person will stab her in the back or not. A gust of wind blows through the space and it gets slightly cooler. The hallway opens up into a larger space, likely the area where people wait for the train and the subsequent tunnel itself. Who's there? Hound speaks, her voice echoing, slight echoes back. Pillars, and the train tracks further on. Another gust of wind blows through the tunnel into the station, and she smells the slightest whiff of something. She doesn't even realize her mouth has split into a manic grin until her friend says, I thought you said this place would be empty? It should be, she says, then presses her lips over her smile in a hum. This, Arsenal curses, ruffling their hair. The sounds echoing back and forth help her create a vague map of the area in her head, a skill she's been honing for years. I'm leaving. Before they turn away, Hound reaches out and catches their bare arms. The pulling and flexing muscles under her calluses tell her that they're stopping in their tracks. Can I borrow it? There are few people that Hound would make an effort at maintaining eye contact with. Arsenal is one of them. She faces vaguely where their head should be, moving her rarely used eyes in an effort to meet their gaze. There is a pause. Arsenal sighs, but she knows there is fondness in it. Yes. Their skin ripples and Hound catches the handle of the gun as it is pushed out of their arm. Arsenal's other hand reaches into her vest and places the bullets spitting out of their hands snugly in a pocket. It's an NTMD moment and Hound wastes a second to touch their piercings, the ends of their hair, the minute difference of skin where tattoos are inked in. She could never do any of that, even having to shave her head and body hair because of the irritation the slightest bit of STMLTN can cause. With the hefty weight of the gun in her hands, Arsenal steps away from her and runs down the hall to catch up with their gang. Oh, she breathes, this will be fun. A perfect fit to her hands it was. She takes a moment to run a finger over the cool metal before pinging the shotgun. Let the hunt begin. There are two truths and one lie. Izuku does not miss Midoriya Hisashi. Rather, doesn't feel much emotion towards his father save for the resentment of leaving his mother broken. However, any kind of anger such as hatred feels like too much effort to expend on a man who disappeared into thin air. Izuku remembers his father's teachings, but he holds a fair amount of apathy towards Hisashi himself that he can separate his opinions on the man with the good advice he'd taken to heart all these years. Midoriya Izuku knows he is not a good person. Deku is a mask of smiles. Like All Might who can bring about hope and relief for the people he saves, a Pavlovian response of safety. He can fool himself into thinking he's doing some good stopping petty crimes and acting as a response rather than a prevention, but all he's doing is running around playing hero. Even with all the goodwill stacked up in his name though, he doesn't think he can fool himself with the same lying mask he uses on everyone else. Deku, always smiling, always composed, a true showman. In the moment between hearing the ping sound of a gun and the first step forward of the villain coming for his life, Midoriya Izuku has never been more afraid. He's panicking, he realizes as he holds his breath, free hand clasped over his mouth and nose in a death grip to avoid making any sound in the deathly silence of the station. The steps are slow, not unsure but confident, even taunting. "Little rat," the villain says softly. Threateningly. Izuku doesn't move. "Where oh where could you be?" The clack of heel to toe. Dim light streaming in from a grate above, gray overcast. Cold metal grip tight as his fingers tremble. Heart so fing loud. "I smell you," they sing song, and for the first time Izuku sees them step past a pillar a space away from him, a woman with a bald head, dressed for combat and holding a very large very real gun in her hands. He doesn't dare breathe because he has to run to hide. It's a shotgun, right? It can't hit from long distance, but what is her quirk? Speed strength enhancement. She's confident in catching me, but she's using a weapon, so probably not offensive. Quirk, or maybe sharpshoot. No, it's a shotgun. Her head turns and white eyes meet green. Izuku is frozen, instinct screaming to run, but his mind takes control and roots him to place. Her eyes are pale, no pupils to absorb light. Blind? She's confident enough to take on an unknown enemy by herself. Is she cocky or just skilled? This station belonged to a part of town that can no longer be called Muzutafu, instead a ruined and desolate wasteland. The Farlands his brain supplies, and he's heard rumors of what goes on. Of course, working so close to the edge where heroes don't want to bother with, he has no choice but to hear about the business there from people he's saved and fellow homeless people. He concludes that she's skilled, a formidable opponent, one that he has no business being near. That she can smell him means she must have an aspect of smell enhancement, right? The hunt could hint to a quirk anywhere from adrenaline enhancement to beast transformation. Seeing as she's still human, he can narrow it down to beast-like senses. A predator. "You're lucky you're downwind, little rat," she says and takes a step towards him. Izuku has the sudden thought that if she comes near him, he is going to die. "It's more fun if you run." Izuku hits the pipe on the chair in front of him, and the villain has already pulled the trigger, a clanging booming sound echoing throughout the tunnel as the bullets and shrapnel fly into the chair. Izuku's already around the corner of the pillar, bolting for another hiding place. That's more like it. A ping sound and another shot. Izuku throws himself on the ground just in time to dodge it, and maybe he's got shrapnel in his back, but adrenaline is pumping through his blood and he feels nothing. Izuku clears the space to the next pillar and 2 shots ring out where he was, blowing the surface of the brick on the pillar to bits. He's no longer trying to keep quiet, heaving in breaths of panic and fear. "Slippery little rat, do you know who I am? If you're here you might already know this. But I'm going to tell you anyway in case you've fallen in the wrong mousetrap. So you can tell God who sent you to them." Stutter. "They used to call me by many names," the villain says, and there is no click afterwards save for the sound of her shoes. "Predator. Hunter. Orion. 8 bullets. For shots." Izuku stamps his feet forward in a feint and the incoming shot blows off a chunk of stone from the corner of the pillar. "A shooting game with a shotgun, huh? You might want to make yourself a smaller target." Izuku hears the villain moving closer and he runs backwards where he knows the pillar will block him from the shot. What he doesn't expect is for the villain to actually run and chase after him, appearing from behind the pillar and shooting at him. He feels cold spots on his back as he just manages to dive behind the next pillar. Touching the torn hoodie, his hand comes away red and he breathes heavily, staring at it in shock. He couldn't feel anything, but he has to finish this off before it comes back to him and finally incapacitates him. "My name is Hound, little rat. And I can smell the fear in your blood as clearly as I can smell the adrenaline in it." 2 shots. Izuku throws the pipe as hard as he can out of his shelter. This time, she doesn't miss the predictable movement and blows it out of the air, throwing it off course, and the pipe lands, battered from the shot. 1 shot. Izuku can run, but Hound will hunt him. She will follow him to the opening of the tunnel where defenseless people sleep, and she doesn't seem like the person to waver at a measly life in the way of her prey. Or he can take the chance. 8 bullets. For shots. 2 bullets and 1 shot. 2 bullets and 1 stutter. He's going to die either way. He is going to get gunned down, head blown to smithereens of skull shards and brain bits. Or he can turn around. 2 bullets. 1 shot. 1 shot and Izuku is dead. Or 1 stutter and Izuku lives. But he isn't going to know unless he tries it. 2 bullets. 1 shot. Izuku darts out from behind the pillar and runs full speed towards Hound. Her shotgun is facing straight towards his face and his mind already thinks he's half dead, shutting down all thought, leaving him with his most primal instincts. The compartments, the information he's filed away in his head, the steaming train. It slips away until he's left with just the burning fear and longing to survive. Izuku has always lived to save people. He is alive so one day he can save someone else. Those thoughts have kept him going because he's never been truly afraid for his own life. But when you're fighting tooth and nail against death, the threat of pain and fatal oblivion really puts your own attitude into perspective. You want to live so badly you can't breathe. She pulls the trigger. The gun jams. Izuku is there in a second to push the gun up to the ceiling as surprise takes over Hound's expression. He ducks and sweeps her off her feet, only for her to grab onto his sleeve and yank it along with her. Izuku topples and immediately goes for the punch. It lands, but Hound's already flipping their positions over until she's looming over him, guns scattered to the side. Izuku tries to push up, but she pins him with one hand firmly on his throat, thumb pressed against his trachea methodically. He chokes. Clever. Very clever and very slippery, she hisses, annoyed as she reaches over for the gun. Izuku tries to gasp but only spit flies out. He can't breathe, his throat feeling like it's collapsed into itself. Pressed to the hard floor, his back starts to burn and that prompts him to start clawing at her arms, trying to reach for her face to do maximum damage in a futile struggle. Stop squirming, you little runt, she sneers and lets go of the gun momentarily to grab one of his arms and wrestle it down to his side so she can pin it down with her knees. I said I'm going to enjoy this, but this wasn't really what I had in mind. She checks on the gun and clicks her tongue. Always happens when you least expect it. This your quirk, little rat? He's seeing dark spots in his vision. Doesn't matter. I'm going to enjoy myself some other way. Hopefully you don't scream too loud. She PPS the gun. Izuku swings his free arm up as hard as could and throws his hand into her open mouth. He grabs her lower jaw from the inside of her mouth and pulls as hard as he could, making her lose her composure in surprise. He doesn't allow himself much time to breathe in precious oxygen with his newly freed airway, only grabbing the shotgun and pushing it forward as much as he could. Hound regains control before the shotgun is pointed the wrong way and she pushes back. You think you can beat me in a strength battle, you little runt? Her fingers are straining against the trigger where Izuku is pushing so desperately just to get the shot off and somehow work through that if actually he does. You're much more trouble than you're worth. Izuku can barely see through the black spots. No, his vision is just blurry from the tears. He huffs a hysterical laugh at the situation and he feels the weight above him even more in that moment. He doesn't want to die, he doesn't want to die, he can't die, he doesn't want to die, he wants to live, he has to live, he needs to live, he can't, he will, he wants to live so badly, please anyone, anything, any deity, he needs to live, someone save him please. There is a feeling. Something solid in front of him, but not actually there. Almost as if it's behind Hound. Like a shiny shell or even an antique coin that would fit in the collection he doesn't have, something to place in the wide expanse of his mind. In his desperation, Izuku doesn't think much about it. He only grabs and pulls. Everything happens in a few moments. Hound's eyes clear above him and she reels. It's quiet. Everything is so quiet. Her clothes don't feel like they're chafing her every movement. The air smells stale. Normal. Not overpowering. And she sees green. Like grass. Oh, how she wants to see blue again. She remembers the emerald green on the rolling fields, and above it was a brutal blue, a color she can't recall. She wants to see blue. Something muffles her mouth. Something cold, but not the biting cold. It's warm and has a tangy taste that's too mild for her to recognize. Then red. Then nothing. Izuku's finger closes over Hound's relaxed hold on the trigger and her head explodes above him. A pack of wolves ran through the capital. As it was slowly covered with dark, ominous clouds. The first thing Izuku thinks is happening when he grabs a subconscious pressure is that he is dying. The world explodes literally and metaphorically. At first he doesn't quite register what happens because all at once his senses come alive and his whole being feels like it's on fire. He feels his hair bristling atop his head, the curls plastered to his forehead with sweat instead separated into thin little strands that he can feel poking sharp ends into the skin of his head, and moisture seeping through his pores, sweating out and cooling against his skin, gravity pulling the droplet up and over, and a part of him anticipates it as it slides down to nestle against his ear. Except he can feel hundreds of these sensations all over his body, and Izuku feels like he is dying. There is nothing but chaos where his normally calculative mind is, and in the space of it that he never realized was this empty before, there is something, a feeling or a pressure or a name, but Izuku can't quite put it into words, so he breathes in, and oh gods and all that is above him, dust tickles his nose hairs and metallic moisture seeps into the back of his throat and he almost chokes because he can feel everything moving inside himself and oh god, oh if, oh maker what the f, and he muffles. Then the world goes quiet and Izuku thinks he's dead, his mind blanking instead into a paralyzing fear. On instinct he stops muffling whatever that pressure is and his world is once again engulfed in feelings and smells and lights, the wind echoing in the caverns of his eardrums, thundering through, and his fingertips feel too small when he clenches them, his whole body too big as he shifts around. Come, he tells himself. Take stock of your surroundings. He almost just died, and apparently this villain's quirk isn't just enhanced sense, probably not an invisible mutation then if she can inflict it on other people. An emitter is the most likely answer, and humans have always tried to classify things, but nature never wants to fit into neat little boxes. A notable example is the platypus as well as the phenomenon known as quirks. Whatever quirk it is that's been inflicted on him isn't sensory deprivation for sure. A type of enhancement? Can you control the output of the enhancement if Hound isn't entirely incapacitated while using the quirk like Izuku currently is? He's distracted. That's not good. He curls his fingers and the squelching sound of something liquid in the palm of his hands is just slightly too loud and he winces. Toes curls still there. Blink. Something is wrong with his vision because everything is just too entirely in focus and he can see dust and hair and the very moisture in the air and the light streaming in splits down the middle and oh god oh if, he can feel things on his eye, moisture or dust or blood vessels on his eyelids just resting against his cornea and Izuku closes his eyes just to stop. He can't move the rest of his body. Wait no, scratch that. There's something heavy on top of him and very suddenly when Izuku very forcibly returns awareness to his torso, he screams. The sound is too loud, and pitched at C4 but it's still too high, too wide a breath but he can feel oh god oh help he can feel vibrations in his throat but no this is worse oh god. Though it's difficult to calm down when you can feel 100 shards of metal and shrapnel digging through skin and touching each nerve and sending fire running straight to his brain. It takes a while for him to categorize his thoughts, his feelings, and his situation, which leads him to his next discovery. There is a rapidly cooling human body on top of him. Ammonia stings his nose and Izuku. There is wetness and red and when Izuku opens his eyes, expecting and fearing the worst, expecting empty dead eyes staring at him, he definitely doesn't expect this. There are pieces of brains on his shirt. Izuku reaches out to touch something and it's solid and he realizes it's a shard of skull. He stares at it blankly before he starts to tremble and tear up and he can't breathe. He doesn't know how he got up, but the only consciously thinking part of him is thankful he hasn't gone fully catatonic. He has, however, completely detached his mind from his body as it moves on autopilot. The pressure is muffled again. No, not muffled. He kind of let go of it of sorts, but it only felt like he was muffling it because of the sudden change of everything feeling like everything into nothing, absolute null silence. He is distantly aware of vomiting up whatever little he had and gagging for an unspecified amount of time. Midoriya Izuku is notoriously good at categorizing his feelings, compartmentalizing his consciousness, and he does exactly that as he cries and occasionally jijis, head pressed to the ground as if it will swallow him whole. So he does what he's good at and lays out the facts. He killed someone. Izuku never thought he'd come to know the taste of human brains splattered onto his lips, but that's not even the worst part. It strikes him again that he just took a human life with his own 2 hands. He killed a person, a living, breathing person with friends and family and loved ones. Hound will never hurt anyone again, but she will also never speak again. There is probably someone out there who admires her in the same way Izuku admires Katsuki, and the very comparison makes him sick because it makes him think, what if Kaken is the one dead? He tells himself it's not the same because he doesn't know Hound, but there is someone out there who does. What if Hound was someone's partner or sister or guardian? A villain hurts people but they don't deserve death, and Izuku just killed her. She is dead and never breathing ever again, and Izuku's mind is a mess because it strays back to what if Kaken was the one dead? A hysterical part of him thinks he's impressive for skipping a few steps. The most he's ever hurt someone is to give a criminal a concussion, and now he's blown someone's brains out, but the reminder shocks him out of the bubbling laugh and back into awareness for a split second. He nearly screams, dull fingernails digging into the concrete and drawing scratches on each fingertip. He presses his tongue to the dirty floor because otherwise he would have directed that energy to his jaw and bitten off his own tongue, and maybe he deserves that for what he's taken from the world. Calm yourself. Lay out the facts. He killed someone. He is affected by something that gives him enhanced senses. The most logical thing would be Hound's quirk, but Hound is dead, Izuku killed someone, Hound is dead, and he can't keep blaming this sensory overload on her anymore because he killed her and she will never be able to use her quirk ever again. However, this optional part of the enhanced senses is strange, and something he's never seen before. He tells himself quirk singularity means it's possible, but there is something else. This pressure, this presence in his subconscious, it's comforting. It's not comforting the way his mom's cooking is, or Taken's fingers through his hair, or Kigo's reassuring pat, oh God he misses Kigo. It's comforting the way Hisashi would come back home late and sneak into his room when he thinks Izuku is asleep and place his palm on Izuku's forehead. There is a presence in the vast expanse of his mind that he's filled with skills and knowledge and memories that will never completely fill it up, but this presence is different. It takes up space, like it's meant to be there, fitting perfectly like a missing puzzle block, and Izuku cannot bear to remove it. It's his now, a part of him. He absent-mindedly wonders if this is what it feels like to have a quirk, but he stops himself, short-circuiting a little. Calm yourself. Lay out the facts. He killed someone, and he's just been thinking about this presence, reminiscing on good memories while he's still alive and another human being is dead beside him. He currently has an ability to enhance his senses. It might be temporary, but it's an ability. If he is to be so bold, a meta ability even. Something like a quirk. Kid. He realizes for the first time that he's drifting through the world like he's underwater, stuck in a still Sargasso with no sight of wave nor undertow. Kid? Midoriya. He hurts a lot. Oh if you're bleeding out. Oh if, oh geez, oh god, oh sheet. He hurts but he's also so cold. Midoriya, you're not coherent right now. No he's not. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. Midoriya, do you hear me? Izuku must have nodded or given an affirmation because the voice continues. You're gonna be in a lot of pain. Scratch that you already are. I'm going to have you ask you to let me pilot you for a bit. What the f does that mean? I can shut off your pain receptors, I can help bring you to Tachibana, is that okay? He doesn't get the chance to respond because he's already slipping into blissful sleep. People don't often call in crimes that occur near or around the Farlands, and it's even more unheard of for crimes to be called in from within. Sansa looks away from the mess of a body on the ground as the forensics take evidence from the scene. The direction he turns towards, however, has a smattering of blood against a pillar. He sighs because he's seen too much already, and really he became a police officer because his mother was one and she pressured him into it, but he's already passed the bar exam, so really he could have done anything else but this. But because he was a pushover and his whole life is a mess, he ended up in a job he doesn't want but takes way too seriously, seeing corpses and blown off heads. He lightly taps his head, a silly thought passing his mind that he's in danger and that's why his life is flashing before his eyes. Anyways, Sansa spots someone and makes his way over. I thought you were busy. What are you doing here? Tsukachi steps up on a block the police have provided for the investigators and onto the train platform. taking his hat off as he does. He nods at Sansa and answers, "It's not often we're in the Farlands after all." "That's what I've been saying," Sansa continues. "It's not that the Muzutafu police department can't enter the Farlands, but the remains of the former city aren't just dangerous because of their precarious structure but also because of the rats making a home there. Entering as an authority with no justifiable reason is akin to asking to disappear. I've interviewed some of the homeless at the mouth of the parallel tunnel and they said they heard loud bangs earlier in the afternoon," Tsukachi replies. "It's been an estimated 5 hours since the crime." The transfer line tunnel? The more Sansa thinks about it, the more he feels it was a shame. The station was perfectly functional and used to serve as a transfer point to many other lines. Too bad someone razed the city above it to the ground. "No, well, yes," Tsukachi continues, glancing down at the crime scene. "There's a small passage connecting the two tunnels. Just big enough for me to pass through. They said none of them have ever come up to the station before." Sansa raises a furry brow, curious. "It's drier and warmer up here, but the breeze could be uncomfortable." He pauses, tilting his head. "But the wind at the mouth of the tunnel is just as bad." "Yes, well," Tsukachi sighs, a hand coming up to hold the top of his head, an alternative to running his hands through his gelled hair. Sansa knows it won't stay styled for long. The individuals who said they've never gone there before were telling the truth. But they don't know my quirk, so they don't really pay attention to their wording. Around them, the forensics team starts to pack up. Someone said, "None of us have gone near the station recently," and it was a lie. They were telling the truth when they said they never went, but they know something, Sansa finishes for him, and they're hiding it. "Exactly. But what's strange is most of them were worried until I said someone was dead." Sansa's brow furrowed. "That doesn't sound right." "Tsukachi-san." They turn to the source of the voice, an officer below the platform on the rails. She gestures to someone behind her, dressed in a worn cardigan and beanie. Sansa follows Tsukachi as they make their way over, and Sansa surmises from the person's attire that she must be a local or one of the homeless. "Can you state your name, ma'am?" The officer says. "Yuri Sanako." Her voice is quiet, subdued. "Can you please relay your information, Yuri-san?" Tsukachi asks gently. The woman hesitates, her eyes idly wandering to the crime scene, and she flinches. She seems to take a few seconds to gather herself and starts, "There is someone we saw coming down here." Tsukachi's eyes widen and he WHPs out his notepad. He gives the woman a nod to beckon her on. "We don't know his real name, but he's just a kid, and look, we didn't really want to get him in trouble, but he hasn't been back yet and I'm worried about him." Sansa puts the pieces together and gives Tsukachi a glance. He most likely explained to the people at the makeshift shelter that a woman was found dead, and these people were relieved it wasn't the kid that was found dead after they heard the gunshots. Tsukachi's face seems to say the same thing. "Can you describe him for me?" Tsukachi asks. Yuri hesitates again before continuing. "He's young. 17 maybe? A bit on the shorter side for a 17-year-old, but taller than me. He has orange hair, but I think it's dyed. I don't recall his eye color, but I just know it's not something plain like black or brown. He calls himself Deku." "Is that an alias?" Sansa asks. "He's a vigilante," Yuri supplies. Sansa and Tsukachi glance at each other again. They start younger and younger. Tsukachi says, "I've never heard of him." Yuri seems to adopt a fond smile as she says, "He's more like the neighborhood helper." "Do you have a quirk description?" "No. We've never seen him use his quirk, but he's unnaturally smart for his age." Tsukachi waits half a beat for Yuri to continue. "Anything else?" She shakes her head and the officer sees her out after Tsukachi gives her his business card. They stand there for a minute and Sansa is just about to open his mouth when someone from the forensic team runs up to them, holding out a plastic bag of evidence. Tsukachi squints at it. "What's that?" "Slime," the man, says, offering no explanation as he tries to catch his breath. "Slime?" Tsukachi repeats, confused, but Sansa's eyes widen in recognition. "You can't be serious," Sansa says to the man in front of them. Soabe's grimace tells him all he needs to know. You were called on the scene, right, Tamakawa? What is it? Tsukachi asks, lost as he looks between them. Sansa sighs. You remember the sludge villain incident? The one who can possess people? Yeah. With the kid and All Might. He escaped custody the same day. Tsukachi frowns. I heard about that. Are you saying this is him? Not only that, Sansa continues, he broke into a kid's house, the kid that ran on the scene at the time, and put a woman in a coma. The two of them made their way to the entrance of the tunnel as they talked. Tsukachi continues, and the kid? Gone. Kidnapped? Sansa shrugs. That's what we think, but the kid left a note saying he ran away. But it could be the villain in his body, Tsukachi finishes. So what you and Soabe were getting at is that this could be the villain's work, but in someone else's body? In Deku's body? I don't think he's still using the kid's body, since Deku's description doesn't really match the kid. Dyed hair, remember? Sansa grunts in consideration, which comes off more as a meow, but he'll never admit that. The kid should be 13 or 14 by now. There's a big difference between that and 17, especially in maturity. The two of them slide into either side of Sansa's police car. Tsukachi says, Yuri-san said he was quite short. And also if it's the villain in control then he would sound more like an adult, right? Sansa pauses. That's a good point. Sure you don't want to get on board this case? Tsukachi snorts, I've got my plate full as is. Why'd you even come? Sansa teases. You really think I'll pass up a chance to see what's going on in the Farlands? I'll push you out right now if you're here to sightsee. Tsukachi shuts up immediately and Sansa smiles, somehow managing to despite the dead body, the missing kid, and the villain on the loose with 1,000 faces. Hello. Ace here to ask, the people who have stuck with me, a question. I've been very not motivated because I've been so lazy with this story that it just kind of died out and there's not many engagements. And also my writing years ago does not do it for me. Can you believe I wrote this story before the pandemic? My laziness knows no bounds. I already had plans written out for this story since 2020, but I just never had the will to write it out on paper when it's already in my head, you know? So, I want to rewrite this story. Laughing face, I'll have the story still up, but I want to rewrite the first few chapters and fix its pacing, maybe alter a few things. I'm inclined towards it already, but I just want a general audience response to know if anyone is still interested in this story. I can promise future better quality, hopefully. However, it might be a long time before it's posted again, but hey, nothing can be worse than not updating for a year. I mean, it's guaranteed to take a while since I have mock exams coming up and real exams not long after that. And also coursework play for my drama A-levels. But I'll try to write a lot before posting so I can have backup chapters for when my motivation runs dry. So, P.S. I'm sad I didn't get to introduce any dad might or dad for one interaction since I didn't get very far. My favorite kind of dads.